let's get closer to the EU with its completely failing economy. I mean, Germany is the powerhouse economy. They've been in recession. This is their third year.
He had him in checkers at the weekend.
Well, here's another thing.
Hello, Olaf.
Also, let's cozy up with Olaf Scholz. 23rd of February, there are German elections.
He's out.
He's out.
Yeah.
Oh, brilliant. That's your big thing. Brilliant. Let's get in with
picking
Donald
the wrong
Trump.
horse.
Let's get in with Donald Trump. Now, this tariff wars, that's going to be very interesting. We'll see what happens with that. Also going to talk about Ofsted.
Right.
Or National Education Union are unhappy with the new Ofsted
What about
rules.
the growing...
That works for me. I like them.
Biggest story of the day for me, the growing roads. You know, they said I couldn't grow concrete. I was ahead of my time,
it's all
obviously.
Coming back again, isn't it?
It's all coming back. Julia Hartley-Brewer, next 3 hours. I'll see you tomorrow at 6.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
A very, very good morning to you. Happy Monday morning. This is Talk, the home of common sense, with me, Julia Hartley-Brewer. Pleasure to have your company. And whether you're listening on DAB+ radio or on your smart speaker, watching on YouTube, on your connected device, it is absolutely great that you can join us. Thank you very much indeed. I'm with you live all the way until 1 o'clock. And coming up in this hour, I'm going to be getting jolly cross about the EU. Well, more, I'm going to be getting jolly cross about Keir Starmer cozying up to the EU. He's going to be the very first British Prime Minister since Brexit 5 years ago, to attend an EU summit. He's going to sit down to dinner with 27 other EU leaders. And I wouldn't mind that at all if it wasn't the fact that this man spent 3 years trying to stop the biggest democratic vote for anything ever in this country from actually being enacted. I don't trust him an inch, or, oh, sorry, you're on the continent now, a centimetre. I do not trust him one iota. We know he would quite happily go back into the single market, quite happily go back into the customs union, quite happily have free movement of people. Christ, we already have free movement of people, don't we? I mean, does anyone think we don't effectively? Right now, we look at our immigration figures. I don't trust him a moment. Particularly also when we've got the issue of Donald Trump, the issue of tariffs, all of that going on. We've got this tariffs on Mexico, on Canada and on China from the US, and they're threatening against the EU. But, if we play nicey-nicey with Donald Trump, we might escape them. Wouldn't that be worth it, rather than cozying up to, Germany and Olaf Scholz, by the way, who is leading a country that's entering its third year in recession and is about to lose office in a few weeks' time. It is utter madness. Meanwhile, French President Emmanuel Macron says that Keir Starmer's appearance at the summit tonight shows that Brexit has failed and that we're basically coming cap in hand to ask to sort of have some tidbits from the EU table. I'd love to know your reaction to that. I mean, my first reaction is, I'm thinking of a French phrase I learnt when I visited my French pen friend back in my teenage years, but I don't think I'm allowed to say it on air. Main thing there is, does Emmanuel Macron know the results of the last elections in France? Because he seems to be remarkably unaware of his own precarious position currently as the president of France. But I want to hear your reaction. He says that Keir Starmer's appearance at the summit shows that Brexit has failed. Do you think he's right? Should we be cozying up to the EU when the EU economy is in the gutter? Or should we perhaps be focusing on America, whose economy is booming? Would that not make more sense? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Give us a call, 0344 499 1000. Text the word talk, then your message to 87222. Calls are charged at the national rate. Text costs £1 standard network rate message. If there's stuff you would like to do closer with Europe, let us know what that is. Also, I'd love to know how you think we could get out of getting tariffs on us from Donald Trump. That would be an interesting one. What's your advice for Keir Starmer? How do we, other than just say, oh, Donald, you're wonderful, how do we get out of those tariffs? I'd love to hear your thoughts on all of that. This is Talk. We are the home of common sense. We're also the home of commentator Sam Armstrong on a Monday morning. I'm sure you're all delighted to hear. He's joining us once again. Very good morning to you.
Good morning.
I'm genuine. I'm incandescent. But not with Macron and the other EU leaders. They're waste of space. They are the past, not the future, most of these people. But Keir Starmer, cozying up to them, we know what he wants to do.
Yeah, I never doubted, not for a second, that Keir Starmer was going to sell us out, that he was going to betray Brexit, that he was going to break each and every one of his promises on this topic. But I never imagined in my wildest dreams he would do it so quickly.
So openly.
He's been in office for barely 200 days and he's already flying cap in hand out to Brussels ready to sell us out. And we know already from the newspapers, he's told us exactly what he's going to do. Starting with the fishermen. All of our fish in the North Sea, the first thing that's on the table is you, British fishermen who go out and do an incredibly dangerous job to put food on our table, who have been done over in the worst possible way for decades by the EU, and were one of these real people that really thought finally they were going to get some justice out of Brexit.
We're going to get back our fishing rights in our waters.
Not only did we say, no, our fishing rights for the time being stay with the Dutch, the Spanish, the French, and not British fishermen in Scotland and Norfolk and Lowestoft and Kent and all the other places. But no, Keir Starmer's going to sell it out ad infinitum forever.
And we know that this is the key demand from the French as well. Absolute key demand that in the next few years, that we don't take back control of our own waters and they can keep using them, which is a massive hit on us. But it's not just that issue.
It's not.
There's, Defence Pact as well is what they're looking at. And we should come into a closer defence security pact with Europe. Now, of course we should work with EU leaders. We should work with, as we do under AUKUS, with Canada and New Zealand and Australia and America in our security. We have the Five Eyes. We work very closely. However, when we saw Russia invading Ukraine, it was the EU, it was Germany in particular, who dragged their feet over actually helping Ukraine. We went ahead and we in America went in and helped Ukraine. Now, I don't want to be tied to them. Where was the EU when Falklands were invaded by Argentina? Nowhere to be seen. I do not want to be tied to the EU on defence security. Our defence and security needs sometimes align with the European Union, and sometimes they don't, because we have other issues. We have, as a naval nation, we have other concerns around the world. We can't do that. It just seems to me crazy. But in terms of where the EU is right now, this is a massive. Yes, the EU as a bloc is our biggest trading partner. The US as an individual nation is our biggest trading partner as a nation. But the world is expanding outside of Europe. Europe is going to be a smaller and smaller population. It's going to be smaller and smaller economies. They are not growing. Even the ones that are growing by a tiny amount. And we've got all these other countries around the world, that, especially in Asia and in America, that are booming. And they are ready to go. We need to be focusing our strengths where the money is, don't we?
Yeah, absolutely. It's not only the case that European economies in the EU basically haven't grown in the last 15 years. It's in that time, much like us, they have imported millions of people into their countries and still not grown. And as a result, the people of Europe, much like us, are about $2,000, $3,000 poorer than they were in 2008. Whereas in America, in Asia, in basically every other corner of the planet, people are $20,000, $30,000 better off than they were 15 years ago. As well they should. But in the EU, we are consuming ourselves with regulation.
Yeah.
They are...
Well, including in the net zero policy. One of the things that Keir Starmer's talking to EU leaders about today is joining effectively this EU law on carbon schemes. Basically, more net zero dead weight policy that costs jobs, makes energy more expensive, takes up agricultural land, and I mean properly mad stuff that, by the way, anti-growth.
Yeah, and actually, look, it is mad stuff. And actually, finally, for the first time after 30 years, people are increasingly waking up to just how mad that is. And not just here in this country, right across Europe. And that's the curious thing about Keir Starmer, about Olaf Scholz, about Emmanuel Macron. They are yesterday's men. Keir Starmer's just got in and he's already seemed dated.
But again, by default, and he's got a mandate. I accept that. That's our democratic system. But he's not kind of where the mood of the country is.
And right across Europe, increasingly, populist parties are popular. Surprise, they are doing what people want to do. And this whole...
since when was that a dirty thing, a dirty word? It's weird, isn't it?
This whole fabric of doing deals at winter resorts in snowy alpine towns, going there, agreeing basic minimum taxes, agreeing carbon stuff, all doing deals and consuming countries in it, is ebbing away every day. And Donald Trump changes a lot. He changes everything. He's not going to do this climate stuff. He's not going to do minimum corporation tax. The whole framework has been shattered by a democratic revolt of people across the Western world that have had enough of seeing their living standards comparatively decline, while those countries around the world, not least China, a dictatorial, genocidal regime, are marching ever closer. And they have woken up to the reality that elites in this country, elites in Europe, and elites around the world are quite happy to see our comparative state decline. Other countries catch up because they're embarrassed about us, they're embarrassed about our history, and they're embarrassed by their own countries.
But also because they're doing okay. So they don't really mind because their jobs aren't being taken and things like that. But look, let's talk about the tariffs. Look, as I said, I voted for Donald Trump this time round as by far the better choice of the two candidates for the US presidency if I'd had an option. And I've welcomed lots of the things he's done. I mean, executive order after executive order, like, yes, love it. DEI, net zero, all this, drill, baby, drill, tick, tick, tick. However, I've always said, but I'm not going to agree with everything he does. And I don't even think most Republicans would agree with most things with everything he does, including the tariff war. So he has launched his tariff war against Canada, Mexico and China. Now, I think China, we kind of understand that, wouldn't we? A 10% tariff on goods, most goods coming from China. Canada and Mexico, during his first term, he replaced NAFTA with another free trade agreement between the North American states, which actually was remarkably similar to the NAFTA. It was just he wanted to tear it up and show he was doing something. 25% tariffs on them for a huge number of goods. Those countries are talking about their retaliation. It was interesting over the weekend at major sports events involving American teams where the US national anthem was played, Canadians were booing. Canadians aren't like that, Canadians are very angry at the moment with their own Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau. He's leaving, he's out in his ear. Got very high hopes for the Conservative replacement, Poilievre. But the tariff wars, it looks like, are going to be extended to the EU. We're told that Donald Trump is saying, I mean, again, you wake up in the morning like, what has Donald Trump said this week, overnight? He's hinted he could spare the UK from tariffs. He said the UK is way out of line and we'll see, he said, but the EU is really out of line. The UK is out of line, but I'm sure I think that one could be worked out. But the EU, it's an atrocity, he says, what they've done. And he said that his discussions with Starmer had been very nice. He said, we've had a couple of meetings, we've had numerous phone calls, numerous phone calls. We're getting along very well. Now, that would be encouraging. if that was the relationship. I mean, because I think most of us were expecting that relationship to be pretty dicey on the basis that, I mean, there couldn't be more different personalities, as in Donald Trump at least has a personality. HR boss, as we're going to be talking to the author of that new book in front of the Sunday Times yesterday about, basically that Keir Starmer is an HR manager, not a leader, which I think really sums him up. But there's threat of retaliation from the EU. We could face tariffs. Even if we don't directly get hit by tariffs, it's going to hit the world economy. This is a bad thing for the world. Do you think these are going to continue? Do you think there is going to be a trade war, or do you think this is some sort of opening gambit by Trump, particularly over he wants to deal with the issue of opioids, fentanyl in particular, coming into America, and also illegal migrants on the Mexican border?
Yeah, well, a couple of points here. Firstly, we shouldn't pretend that it's just America playing at it, and he's got a point about the EU. You try selling bananas into Europe if you're not a former French colony, and you're going to have a very, very hard time.
The EU is based on tariffs. It's free trade within the EU and the economic area, but everyone else faces tariffs. So they can talk a good game being anti-tariffs, but that's literally the basis of the customs.
So when Donald Trump turns around and says this, he is telling the truth, and we should, recognise that. But here's what Donald Trump's doing, which is different. He is tying tariffs to non-trade matters, which is very different. Yeah. So he's saying, look, we have a drugs importation problem, so we're going to stick tariffs on you because we think you're going to come out of it worse than we are. And if you fix the drugs, we'll take off the tariffs. That hasn't been tried before. I think, as we saw with Colombia, in which he got the deal, they sent the migrants back on the president's own plane, and then what you see as a result is the tariffs coming off. I think this is going to be bumpy. I think it's going to be eventful, as it always is with the president, and then eventually you're going to come to some kind of arrangement. But here's the thing.
The number one issue in America in the election was, as it is here, is cost of living. Yeah. I mean, migrants, way up there. Cost of living, fundamentally. Tariffs, if you impose tariffs on goods coming into your country, you're imposing them deliberately to make those goods more expensive. Yep. You impose extra costs on your consumers. I saw some estimate of the tariffs announced so far. We're looking at $1,600 per American family. Yep. That's a lot of money for people who are struggling to pay the bills right now.
It is, but if you're a Republican voter that's just swung over in Michigan, in Wisconsin, in all of these kind of Rust Belt, Ohio-type states, working in manufacturing, and America, unlike us, still has a manufacturing sector.
Because they've got an energy policy that means you can actually afford to have a manufacturing policy.
You have seen cheap imports, often subsidised illegally under the World Trade Organization's rules. They're not meant to do that, but China and Mexico, all of them, outcompeting American workers. And sure, on the one hand, it is good for American consumers to get cheaper goods. On the other hand, there is a trade-off. And
you've got the goods, but you also haven't got the jobs. I mean, that is the crucial thing there. Although there is an issue, particularly he's obsessed with car sales. Donald Trump. People don't want to buy American cars because they're not very good.
Well, look.
Whereas Americans do want to buy German cars because they're very good.
Well, but around the world, actually, the global biggest car manufacturing economy that's getting the biggest boost, that's growing the fastest, where? China. And, based on ripped off American technology and
subsidies, cheap coal-fired energy.
Frankly, slave labour in great parts. And you can understand why, if you're an American car manufacturer in one of those states that's seen your pay suppressed further and further and further down relatively, you are a big backer for that.
Until it hits further. But you're right, there is that trade-off. We can get cheap goods, but if no one's got a job, doesn't matter how cheap those goods are, as you say. I would love to hear from you, because this isn't all about America. This is what it's going to do to us. Are we going to be part of that trade war? What do we do? Do we go closer to the EU? That's clearly what Keir Starmer wants to do. His appearance at this key EU summit tonight. Emmanuel Macron saying it shows that Brexit has failed. Has Brexit failed? I don't think we've taken advantage as much as we should have of Brexit and the opportunities and freedoms it gave us. Of course we didn't. I mean, lockdown was a bad start. Ukraine and the energy crisis was a bad start. But come on, there's plenty more to go there. Should we be cozying up to Donald Trump? How do we avoid those tariffs? I want to hear from you. I'd love to hear. What would your tactic be in particular for dealing with the EU and dealing with Donald Trump right now, today? Because it is a right now, today issue. Give us a call. 03444 499 1000. That is the number to call. Text the word talk and your message to 87222. Send us a message on X at Talk TV. And don't forget, the calls are charged at the national rate. Text costs £1, standard network rate message. Really want to get to those calls very soon. I do want to talk about a couple of the stories, if we can squeeze them in. Firstly, Ofsted, they've got a new plan for how they're going to do reports. The basic changes, we used to have a system where you graded schools, there were 4 grades, and you were judged on 4 or 5 categories. That's the old system. Then we had a lot of schools were complaining about the high pressure. Again, well, yeah, because you're being judged on whether you can do a good job for the kids in your school. Then we had the sad death, the suicide of Ruth Perry, a head teacher, took her life after her primary school was downgraded from outstanding to inadequate, so highest to lowest, over safeguarding concerns. The inquest found that the inspection had contributed to her death. I was always of the view that it was very, very sad, and I'm very sorry, but I don't think for a moment you should adjust the entire rating system for English schools because of one incident like that. As of Monday, the inspectorate are going to announce these proposals to grade schools in England with 5 ratings. Across 8 to 10 areas, from exemplary to causing concern. The National Education Union, which basically the Marxist, they don't like it. That's an instant thumbs up for me then. If the National Education Union don't like it, that must be a good thing. They're opposed to all grading of schools and children. They think everybody should face no testing at all. Head Teachers Unions, though, also unhappy about this. But the key thing is, grading schools hasn't got anything to do with the teachers or the head teachers. It's for the children and their parents trying to do the best for their children, isn't it?
Look, 80 years ago, people in this country were capable of landing on a beach, charging into German guns and encountering some of the most horrific, horrendous scenes that any of us can possibly imagine. Are we really saying that within 4 generations we've got to the stage where teachers, professionals, graduates of university degrees cannot handle being given the same grade that a student would get given?
Yes.
Apart from, with GCSEs, we've also changed the system, so we can't give GCSEs grades between A and D.
But that's exactly what a lot of these teachers do think.
They want us to be incapable, without having a university degree, of recognising whether or not they are qualified to be doing the job that they are being paid tens of thousands of pounds a year of taxpayers' money to do.
And especially head teachers. Head teachers are very well paid. And I think they should be very well paid. And good heads are stardust. You always choose your school by the head teacher. That's your number one thing you should look at. I've been told that by I've always said, what's your advice? Head teacher, it's all about the head. They set every agenda in the school. But yeah, it's high pressure. But loads of people, if you're a salesman, you're judged by every single sale you make, the end of the month. Oh, you're out. If you're in banking, you get that. My job, we're judged by ratings. You're judged by everything. You one wrong interview, wrong word, you could be out. Life is high pressure. Get over yourselves.
Yeah, and let's be clear about what we mean about pressure. What we're actually talking about is there are consequences for how well you do or not. And boy, should there be consequences for how well teachers and head teachers are educating our children. That is the number one most important job we have as a society, to leave our children better off, brighter than we were a generation ago. And if teachers don't think that they can handle it, then I'm sorry, but get out of the classroom.
100%. Amen to that. Love to hear your thoughts on that as well. I'm sure you have an opinion. 0344 499 1000. Love to hear from you if you're a teacher or a head. Frankly, you should be working right now, but in the staff room, having a break, preparing your lessons. Wink, wink. Do get in touch. Tell us whether we're right or wrong. Love to hear your thoughts. 0344 499 1000. Your call's up next. This is Talk, the home of common sense.
across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk this morning. I'm Julia Hartley-Brewer, the home of Common Sense. Sam Armstrong was still with me, who has definitely had... Is it Weetabix? Is it 3 Weetabix you have in the morning? Yeah, he's definitely had about 8 of them by the sounds of it. Love it. This is why we have you here on a Monday morning. Always wake us up. I'd love to hear your thoughts on where we are. You can get in touch on any of the topics we're talking about, but particularly with Keir Starmer going to sort of cosy up, place where he feels most at home. Remember, he said he preferred Davos to Westminster in that interview, and he definitely prefers Brussels to Westminster as well. And he's going to be having meetings and have dinner and cozying up with all his totally failing EU leaders. And he's desperate to get back into the EU. You know there'll be a lot of wink, long term. Let's get back in. In response to that, Macron has said that Keir Starmer's approach shows that Brexit has failed. Shouldn't we be, if we're going to cosy up to anyone, shouldn't we be cozying up to the booming biggest economy in the world, to the US? Shouldn't we be trying to avoid these tariffs which Donald Trump is going to be putting on not just Mexico and Canada and China, but the EU is next? We're not completely clear of this, but shouldn't we be focusing on America and the other growing economies? Love to hear your thoughts. Give us a call, 0344 499 1000. Let's go to Stuart. He is in Wigan. Hello, Stuart. Good morning to you, Stuart. Hello there, my love. What do you reckon on all of this then?
Well, Brexit was the best thing that's ever happened to us. And
I'm
as
with you
far
all
as
the way.
I'm concerned, you know what I mean? Brexit's not failed. It's these politicians that have failed us, the Labour and Conservative politicians, that seem to think we're thick, but are scared to death of coming out to our front doors and telling us we're thick.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. But also the key thing is, people think Brexit was something like a little click of the fingers and, at 11 p.m. on January the 31st, in 2020, everything changed. No, it's the start of a process. It's something, we were 47 years in the EU. It's going to take more than 5 years for us to extricate ourselves and to take advantage of everything. But they've just not made a very good start because basically, and I include Boris Johnson in this, none of the people who were actually been in government really actually embraced Brexit.
Well, I don't think they've made a start at all. Because the first thing they should have done is come out to ECHR.
Yeah.
They should have done that straight away. But I'm sick to death of being told what to do. I don't like being told what to do anyway. But at the end of the day, I ain't being told what to do off somebody in another country. Yeah,
but at least we can, should we, metaphorically with our vote, put 2 fingers up to anyone telling us what to do in this country and punish them if they either get it wrong, as they always do. What do you make about the US? Should we be focusing on the US and on Asia rather than Europe now?
Oh, definitely. I mean, when Biden was in power, you couldn't pay me enough money to go to the US, like you couldn't pay me enough money to go to London. You know what I mean? I'm from North West.
What's wrong with London?
Money to go to London. Well, have you seen state of it?
I see it every day.
I'm too nautic to places like that, me. But I'll tell you what, I would move to America today.
Do you know what? That's my worry, is an awful lot of our youngest people, the brightest and the best, who've got the qualifications, who'd be welcomed with open arms by the US. I'm worrying a lot of them are going to be looking to the US because they're going to look at this country and go, where's my future here? Stuart in Wigan, a proud Wigan man. Thank you very much indeed for that call. London's not that bad. Bits of it. London's not that bad. I live in London. John is on the line. He's in Dorset. Hello, John.
Morning, Julia. Good morning.
Are you as proud of Dorset as Stuart is of Wigan? That's what I want to know first.
Am I what? Sorry,
as proud of Dorset as Stuart is of Wigan?
I'm not sure. We've got a Lib Dem MP and a Lib Dem council who are about to bankrupt us. Somerset has bankrupted them.
I can see why you might have some question marks about that then. What do you make of Starmer cozying up with the EU?
I'm really seriously worried. I'm quoting here from the Press Association. Last November, Spain proposed to legalise 300,000 undocumented immigrants every year. They have a 250,000 shortfall with their ageing population. The minimum wage in Spain is 8.87 euros, which is currently 7.38 an hour.
Yeah.
Now, once those guys get in there, can you imagine they're going to stay in Spain long when they come here? And can you imagine what Starmer and that idiot Streeting are going to do for the care industry? We're going to have a whole load of undocumented workers who won't have been processed heading this way for the better bucks.
I mean, again, I mean,
I
mean, this is the thing, and it's amazing, isn't it? How much there's this youth mobility scheme, the idea that young people from the EU, Brits, they can go and work for a couple of years in the EU. Yeah, I mean, that's literally basically holding the door ajar and saying in you go. But it won't be a load of Brits going to work in Spain and Poland or wherever. It'll be the other way round. And as we know, as you say, it's a completely porous borders.
Well, if anybody's been to the Canaries, a large proportion of these immigrants are from Africa, and they're all under 30, selling knockoff tat around in the Canaries. And they're going to head here. So our immigrant situation is going to compound itself.
Yep, I'm with you all the way. I'm with you all the way, John. Thank you very much indeed. Appreciate that call. 10:31 is the time. We're going to take another quick break. Up next, we're going to be talking to the Sunday Times journalist and co-author of the brand new book, Get In, the inside story of Labour under Starmer, which has revealed that even Starmer's closest aide, his chief of staff, described him as an HR manager, not a leader. Doesn't that just sum it all up? We'll talk to him up next about all the big stories in town and latest revelations from his brand new book. This is Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
A very good morning. Welcome back to the show. 10:34 is the time. I'm Julia Hartley-Brewer. This is the Home of Common Sense at Talk. Sam Armstrong's still with me. Just a few moments, we're going to talk to Gabriel Pogrund about his brand new book and the latest what's going on in Whitehall. But I mean, where do you think things are standing right now? Because we know we've got infighting in terms of the government. He's already lost, a cabinet minister, another senior minister over corruption probe, for goodness sake, and one over fraud. He's lost his chief of staff. We know there's massive infighting. We've got this big push for growth. Rachel Reeves in this big speech last week. She's going on about growth and Heathrow expansion. Ed Miliband, nowhere to be seen ever since. How do you think this new government is doing?
Well, I think the remarkable thing about this government is Keir Starmer's come into office as a Prime Minister, probably the PM that we know the least about ever coming in. We know very little about him, actually. Yeah. And this government came in without a clear plan of what it wanted to do in so many areas. Ed Miliband, actually, is one of the exceptions. He was the only minister, really, that knew what he wanted to do. It just happened to be disastrous. Yeah. And as a result, so far, this government is pushing basically the civil service playbook for what do you do when your government is in trouble. And we do hear tales that Morgan McSweeney, this figure, the new chief of staff in all but name, has come in and he's got a plan as to what he wants to do with the country. But so far, we're just seeing a government that's sort of drifting around,
desperately clutching for ideas, which is very strange after 4 years of planning to get into government and very strong expectations that they would be moving into government. Well, let's talk to the man who is a co-author of the brand new book, Get In, The Inside Story of Labour under Starmer. That's Gabriel Pogren. He's Whitehall editor at the Sunday Times. A very good morning to you, Gabriel.
Morning. I hope you'll forgive me for being... I feel like I'm David Attenborough. A very intrepid interview. I'm sat on a park bench, but if you can hear me okay, I can hear you.
Well, I can hear you. Yes, I know we just lost your Zoom. I think. I mean, are you surrounded by gorillas at all, or in the jungle, or is it just you? Have we lost him again? Are you there? Oh no! Oh no, we've lost him again. Oh, that's so frustrating. Right, we got Gabriel. We got you back. Look, we will persevere. We will persevere. Now,
let's persevere.
Lots of revelations already in the front page of the Sunday Times yesterday. The thing I think one that most of us enjoyed the most was that Keir Starmer's chief aide, the Downing Street chief of staff, Morgan McSweeney, who basically he was the architect of the Labour landslide election victory. Well, I mean, I think the Tories were the architect of that. Really, the man who basically fought a battle with Sue Gray and clearly won because she's out and he's in. But he has actually complained in the past that Keir Starmer behaved like an HR manager, not a leader. And the Deputy Prime Minister, Angela Rayner, once joked that he was so inept he could not run a bath, let alone a country or a party. Tell us about these revelations. Tell us what you've learnt about Keir Starmer.
You know, I think that those remarks are so revealing because they speak to this underlying truth about the man, and I don't know, it's not for me to say whether this is for better or for worse, but he's not a natural politician.
No.
In fact, he overtly loathes politics. He said so. And we reported that in the aftermath of his suspension of Jeremy Corbyn, which, you know, ex post facto, he now describes as this great moment of clarity and incision on his behalf, he was challenged by a left-wing MP, John Trickett, who accused him of shifting to the right. And in response to that, he had almost a righteous indignation. He said, there is no such thing as Starmerism, and there never will be.
It's quite
he rejects the accusation of ideology. He rejects the idea that in order to run a country, one needs to, as he's previously said, tattoo their beliefs to their forehead. And for that reason, journalistically, he's quite a complicated subject.
Yeah, but also ahead of the election, it was very difficult to know. Lots of people said, we're electing a socialist. I mean, he did say, asked if he was a socialist during the campaign. He said, yes, he was. I think a lot of people were pretty surprised by that. I'm amazed that the Tories didn't make more of that. But largely he's been seen as sort of quite a Blairite figure by many, and certainly in the media. I mean, for me, he's just someone who... He doesn't really believe in anything, but he thinks he believes strongly in the NHS, or he believes, in the EU and things, but he doesn't really have an ideology, a thought process. He seems to me to be just a classic, and I know these people because I live and walk among them. North London champagne socialist. He talks a load of good games, and then he lives a champagne socialist lifestyle.
Well, let me say one thing in response to that. On the topic of another North London barrister, Tony Blair,
yeah.
He told us on the record, lots of these books we get accused of oxygenating quotes from advisors who aren't prepared to lift the veil of anonymity, but we did go to the Tony Blair Institute to speak to the former Prime Minister, and he said something fascinating. I mean, now we all think about politics in terms of continuities and discontinuities with the past, but he said that he didn't accept this notion that Starmer was a Neil Kinnock character, somebody who'd shifted from the left to the centre. He actually used the phrase that Starmer was only vaguely left-wing when he assumed the leadership. Vaguely. I mean, it's an amazingly...
I mean, he said a lot of left-wing things to get elected because you had to at the time, but he didn't believe any of them, basically.
Well, he's actually just saying he didn't really come from anywhere. He's not saying... He's saying he didn't go from left to centre. He's saying he went from nowhere to centre. And
But also,
and that's just an amazing thing for a former leader to have said.
Well, indeed, and what's interesting, I mean, going back to that headline yesterday about, Keir Starmer's an HR manager, not a leader. This has been one of the key issues since he took over. This sort of inability to sort of think, on his feet, talk off the cuff. He needs his auto cue, very unsure, making announcements, backtracking, misstepping all the time, calling everyone far right, unable to sort of make key decisions. And when he does make decisions, inevitably, I mean, they've been massively unpopular. He does behave like an HR manager. He does behave like somebody who isn't, a compelling leader. And when you look at what's happening with, Donald Trump and some other sort of leaders emerging in other countries, he does just look very sort of, I suppose, pedestrian, doesn't he? At a time when the world needs, and our country needs, strong leadership. But here's the thing. Lots of people say, he's not going to last the full term. I mean, there's no mechanism to rid him, is there?
Do you want to say, if you wouldn't mind, I want to pick up something you said a few moments ago. I keep quoting Blair. I promise that this will be the last time. I'll force your viewers to endure another one of Blair's comments quoted in the book. But he said to a friend in 2021 that Trump and Bibi were the only people that got things done nowadays. And there is no doubt that Starmer is not Trump and nor is he a Bibi. He's not an instinctive political actor. He is deliberative. Yeah. I just want to say something in Starmer's favour for the sake of being scrupulously fair, which is that he has stared defeat in the face. He was reconciled to resigning after the Hartlepool by-election, and his leadership has more than once followed a bit of a J-curve, or the Nike tick. He has low moments, but then when he does make a decision, he does commit to it. He did that on Corbyn. He did that when he decided not to resign, but to shift to the centre instead. And then once he'd resolved that Sue Gray was not fit for the job, well, he was pretty brutal in defenestrating her. You asked about the question of the succession. I think he's Prime Minister as long as he wants, for the simple reason that he has defied history, or at least recent history, by being a Labour leader to have won an election. And though the Parliamentary Labour Party have a very transactional relationship with him, I think for now that is going to be more than enough to keep him safe. And
also, of course, who are the viable alternatives as well. In terms of you talk about he's not an ideological man. He's obviously, there's a lot of talk, growth. What do you think is driving him in terms of wanting growth, but also wanting to be, closer to the EU and pushing net zero, when many experts would simply say that those are contradictory policies? Is that part of the whole, he doesn't really believe in anything and hasn't thought anything through, or is there something else going on?
Look, he travels light ideologically. I think that thesis has been more than upheld. I think that the Prime Minister and the Chancellor had their fingers burnt with this recent budget, and in an era of potential renewed trade wars, with predictions of sluggish growth, all other things being equal, I think the Treasury knows now that if only in terms of messaging, we'll see whether it's followed by, the reality of their policies, but that they have to commit to this idea that Britain is open for business and that, the days of bat tunnels are over. But we'll have to see whether that is followed up with action.
This is the failure of him as not a natural politician. But this is the thing: to get your fingers burnt and be surprised that there's going to be a backlash to cutting winter fuel payments for 10 million pensioners, to putting taxes up on jobs in the National Insurance Employers' contributions. Tony Blair would have, I don't think he would either have done either of those things, but if he did, he'd have known there'd have been a backlash. He would have prepared the ground and been able to take the hit. It's quite clear that Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves were utterly baffled by the backlash. And that just shows a lack of political nous, political thinking and tactics, doesn't it? And, I'm wondering, with the threats of, reform on coming up and the Tories, that actually that there isn't going to be space for that lack of political naivety.
Well, I'll tell you what. One thing we examine in the book is the fact that there are a number of people, Keir Starmer's own current Director of Communications among them, who did not prepare for the first 100 days of government for the simple reason that they didn't know whether they'd received jobs. It's extraordinary. We reported that Starmer's tour of the regions and nations was conceived on the back of a fag packet. Once said professional, who, by the way, just genuinely didn't know if he'd have a job at all, was told, no, you do. What's the plan? There was no grid. I know that in Westminster we all talk about the grid. There was no actual plan for that period.
But that is incredibly telling, because we needed someone with a plan. I mean, that's the thing. That's the big contrast with Donald Trump coming in. I know, of course, Donald Trump has different powers as president, but executive order after executive order signed in the first couple of days, doing exactly the stuff that he said he was going to do during the election campaign. I mean, yeah, that contrast is explained far more by that. Gabriel, I'm sure we'll talk again. Really appreciate you joining us from your park bench. Gabriel Pogron, he does have a home and an office and everything. He's between the two. Gabriel Pogron, a Whitehall editor at the Sunday Times, co-author along with Patrick Maguire of the new book, Get In, The Inside Story of Labour Under Starmer. Thanks for joining us on that. Sam Armstrong, I mean, it's really interesting, isn't it? This sort of not a natural politician, no ideology, no plan, no instincts. I mean, he's often compared to Tony Blair, but whether you love or loathe Tony Blair, the guy was an instinctual politician and a consummate performer.
Yeah, and there's always been this kind of question with Keir Starmer as to whether this is all a big accident, right? He came in 2019, Boris Johnson was riding high. Everybody expected, you went anywhere in Westminster, they said, look, given the size of his majority, he can't possibly lose next time round. He's got a decade. And Starmer kind of came in there and you kind of thought, is he that filler politician till he make the way for one of the kind of serious, believing politicians, maybe Wes Streeting, that name that always circulates around Labour thinking. And then because the Tory party decided to commit ritual harry-kiri and just blow itself up, he kind of stumbles into Downing Street without a plan. And the crazy thing is, he could kind of stumble on for some while, because you've now got the Conservative Party in Reform splitting their vote. He came in on 34%. Given that between them, the Greens and the Lib Dems are on 19%, he's probably able to squeeze them. Those he loses, he'll probably replace. He'll probably get the same number next time. Tories and Reform split themselves. And you've then got this guy who kind of...
this sort of blancmangy character.
Blancmange, that took the job as a kind of retirement gig, following on from being Director of Public Prosecutions, may end up being one of this country's kind of longer-serving Prime Ministers.
Dear God, I can't do 10 years of it. I can't. 10:47 is the time. We're going to take a break. Up next, we are going to be talking about Labour easing checks on illegal migrants and even repealing Tory rules that would ban illegal migrants from ever gaining British citizenship. You know where this leads. We're going to talk to Alp Mehmet up next. This is Talk.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Good morning. This is Talk, the Home of Common Sense. 10:51 is the time. I'm Julia Hartley-Brewer. Well, let's talk about where we are with migration, legal and illegal right now this morning, because yet again the situation gets worse. Let's talk to Alp Mehmet. He's chairman of Migration Watch UK and joins us. Good morning to you, Alp.
Good morning, Julia.
Thank you very much indeed for joining us. I mean, let's say, just very quickly, first of all, I want to cover the possibility of Keir Starmer, cozying up, we know, this EU summit today with 27 EU leaders, desperately wants to get back in with the EU and wants to sort of say, no, of course we wouldn't have free movement and things like that, but having this deal where, young people under 30s would be able to travel and work. He desperately wants that as a sort of a backdoor way of bringing back free movement, doesn't he? How worried are you about that?
It depends what we sign up to. My feeling is that the EU are going to push their luck so far that even Sir Keir Starmer is going to say, I'm sorry, but we can't do that. Let's wait and see. Unquestionably, the Labour Party, as is on record, would like to have a much closer relationship than we've now got with the EU. And I think this is all about that. What happens with regard to immigration, well, it can't get any worse, frankly.
Well, you say that. We said that for years, and then it kept getting worse. The Boris wave.
True.
Thanks, Boris Johnson. I mean, let's also talk about the illegal migrants.
Incidentally, on Boris Johnson, I warned repeatedly of what was going to happen.
Migration Watch UK has warned from the moment we had the accession of the Eastern European countries. You've been right every time. You've been absolutely, outrageously slurred repeatedly in the media and by politicians, but you've always been right, and I really think people need to pay more attention. It's almost like you're the only people who can add up sometimes. Let's talk about the Home Office then, looking to repeal rules introduced by the Tories rather later than they should have done, that meant that any small boat arrivals, i.e. illegal migrants, could pretty much almost never have a chance of ever becoming UK citizens. We understand that Labour, under their new Border Security, Asylum and Immigration Bill, I never understand why we need to have all these long words in there, but they are now looking at, they say, tackling the small boats crisis, quote, smashing the gangs. But the small print reveals the government is going to repeal lots of previous measures in the Illegal Migration Act under the Tories, only voted through in 2023, so just 2 years ago. But that included a provision that meant pretty much you're ineligible for settled status if you arrive illegally, and you're ineligible for citizenship. So that means you could actually be able to claim citizenship if you've arrived here illegally. I mean, this is madness, isn't it?
It's always been madness. Sir Keir Starmer and Yvette Cooper are a bit like Icarus flying towards the sun on immigration. What they're doing is actually encouraging illegally people to make their way here. That's what it is. The new legislation is going to make it much more difficult to make the case for removing people. It's already very difficult, but it's going to make it even more difficult. With regard to young people, it's going to, again, become so much more difficult to take biometric evidence and biometric information from them. They're now going to insist, the new legislation is going to insist that there is either a parent there for anyone who claims to be under 16 or someone responsible for them, either the local authority, social worker. That's ridiculous. Now, here we are in the absurd situation of having to disprove a made-up story from a migrant coming from a safe car.
So you have 25-year-olds claiming to be under 18. We've even had, people in their late 20s, even early 30s, put into schools, for goodness sake, who were, because we weren't doing proper checks, we just believe it. I mean, I've seen pictures of people, nice big, beard, clear, beefy guys, sure you're 16. I mean, it's absurd. Other countries, the nice countries in the EU, numerous of them, they do clear, genetic, proper testing, where they can actually, they take X-rays, they do testing. They know that they test them immediately. There's no issue whatsoever under any human rights legislation. They're also subject to for finding out whether someone is the age they say they are when they haven't got a single bit of ID to prove anything. It is utterly bizarre. What do you think, though, is behind it? Because we can talk about the rinky-dink measure here and rinky-dink measure there. What do you think the game plan is, such as Labour having a game plan?
It's pretend politics. That they know that it's with the system as it is at the moment, it's almost impossible to detain, deal with quickly and remove anyone arriving illegally. Anyone who's arrived legally and becomes illegal, it's even more difficult.
Yeah.
The legislation is just make-believe at the moment. It's not going to smash the gangs. They're going to continue coming illegally. And those who make their way legally for short stay and stay on, that is going to be given rocket.
Yeah. I mean, it absolutely blows my mind. They reckon it's like 1.5 million people. Who are we kidding? It's probably double that, realistically, number of people who are here who haven't got a right to be here. But no one knows. They haven't got a clue. They didn't know how many people from the EU lived here, even when we left at Brexit. It was 2 million more people than they thought, and they were here legally. I just find it extraordinary that we don't count people in and count people out. I mean, they're taking our details. We're queuing up for hours sometimes at passport control when there's a problem there. How on earth are they not using this information? It is absolutely mind-blowing to me. We'll have to leave it there. Al Mehmet, Chairman of Migration Watch UK, thank you very much for that. Sam Armstrong, I mean, do you think there is this sort of plan by the back door? I mean, lots of talk in America during the American election that, the Democrats wanted to import, millions of people from Mexico. And then, they're here anyway, they're working. Let's give them settled status. Or allow them to vote whether or not they're American citizens or not. And again, that's something Labour wants to do as well, completely changing the demographics and the electoral map of the nation, both the US and the UK. Is it a big conspiracy theory, or are they just utterly inept?
1 in 12, 1 in 13 people in London right now is an illegal immigrant.
Yeah. Oh, at least.
Why does Labour want to give them the vote? Why do they want to change the law to make them citizens and give them the vote? Can you possibly think of any explanation of why this government wants to make sure that if you have broken into this country, if you have stuck 2 fingers up to us and our laws, that upon arrival you can claim British citizenship, stay here forever and vote in each and every election? Anybody got any idea why? Send it in on a postcard.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing, isn't it? But are they... Here's the thing. Are they clever enough to think this sort of stuff through, or do they just... I just think they genuinely do believe, there's no such thing as a nation state and we shouldn't have borders and I think they genuinely do believe that because they've not thought literally anything through.
I think so many of them come from that record of, and I'm afraid to say it, postal vote fraud up in towns in this country.
And it's in Labour. It's in Labour seats almost entirely.
Fix elections.
Well, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Do get in touch. Particularly want to hear from you also about Starmer cozying up with the EU. Does that show as Macron claims that Brexit has failed? Should we be cozying up to the US? I'd love to hear your thoughts. This is Talk. We are the home of common sense.
I spoke with His Majesty the King to request the dissolution of Parliament, and we will have a general election on the 4th of July.
I have just returned from Buckingham Palace to form the next government of this great nation.
Take a look at what happened. I immediately knew it was very serious, that we were under attack.
The time has come, and this surely is England's time. Williams, who scores, and Spain lead. A shot from distance is in. It is Cole Palmer. Low ball in on Palmer, slides it in.
An absolute killer of a goal.
A
agree with the protest, but I don't think the violence was anywhere near necessary.
No, I mean, I don't think anyone, Nigel, would ever think that the violence was the answer at all.
אזרחי ישראל, אנחנו במלחמה.
I probably took a bullet to the head because of the things that they say about me.
If Donald Trump were president, Putin would be sitting in Kyiv right now.
In Springfield, they're eating the dogs, the people that came in, they're eating the cats.
Liberal left couldn't understand that this man could be anything other than the great newsreader, a man of integrity.
Is it possible in any way, shape or form that Keir Starmer didn't know about these facts about the suspect in Southport?
I find it extraordinary that he wouldn't know. It seems that the public is not being told the truth.
No, there's nothing like an American election, I have to say. North Dakota has gone red, South Dakota's red, Texas is red.
Many people have told me that God spared my life for a reason.
Bloomberg UK reporting Ukraine has made the first long-range missile strike inside of Russia. These are the missiles that Biden has approved.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
A very, very good morning to you. This is Talk, the home of common sense. Welcome back to the show. Thank you very much indeed for joining me. Lots to talk about, and whether you're listening on DAB Plus radio or on your smart speaker, watching on YouTube or on your connected device, I say it's great to have your company. Can't wait to hear from you as well. Calls coming in thick and fast. We'll get to as many as we can in the next hour, particularly over where we are with Keir Starmer cozying up with the EU. He wants to cozy up to the EU's net zero policy because, yeah, brilliant, because it's worked out so well for the EU, with Germany going into recession for the third year in a row, every other Western European economy in the doldrums. Yeah, let's cozy up with them. Or maybe we should be trying to get in with the US, given that they are booming, or countries in Asia as well. The Prime Minister today is off to Brussels. He's meeting with the NATO Secretary General. He's also going to have dinner with EU leaders tonight in a reset of relations. It's, of course, 5 years, 3 days since we actually Brexited. Wonderful, wonderful night that was. In response to that, the French President, Emmanuel Macron, who, I hear you say? No, he's still around. Emmanuel Macron says Starmer's appearance at the summit today shows that Brexit has failed. I mean, I'm assuming Emmanuel Macron has conveniently forgotten the result of the last elections in France, when his party failed dismally. And his party is like, well, he can't stand, well, won't be standing again. Realistically, will his party fail as well at the next presidential election? I'd love to hear your reaction to that. Is Macron right? Has Brexit failed? But more focused on it, who should be cozying up to? Because, yeah, we need allies around the world. But which side? Is it the EU or the US? Can we do both? Do we need to be worried more about Donald Trump than we do about the EU? Is this, again, Keir Starmer just trying to take us back into the EU by the back door? Because let's face it, that's what he wants to do. I'd love to hear your thoughts on all of this. Give us a call, 0344 499 1000. You can text on 87222. You can also get in touch on X at Talk TV. Calls are charged at the national rate, text cost 1, standard network rate message. We're also going to be talking more about those Donald Trump tariffs. He's got that tariff war now against Mexico, against Canada and against China. He's threatened tariffs against the EU. The EU's leader, German Chancellor Olaf Scholz, was that EU's leader? One of the key EU leaders, German Chancellor Olaf Scholz, who the Prime Minister met with yesterday, by the way, but he's going to be out on his ear in 3 weeks' time at the German elections. He said the EU is strong enough to react to any tariffs imposed by the US. He says, we will have intensive discussions. I won't carry on. We will have intensive discussions with our cooperation. It's bound to be an Ofcom about our cooperation with the US. He said both the US and Europe benefit from a trade of goods and services. If trade policies make this more difficult, it'll be bad for the US and Europe. Bearing in mind, of course, that the European Union is all about tariffs, because they impose tariffs on everyone outside the European Union, unless you get a trade deal on their terms. We're also going to be talking about flexible working, because the Deputy Prime Minister, Angela Rayner's plan to make flexible working the default default for all means that Britain is set to remain the work-from-home capital of Europe. Oh, well done us. Figures compiled by LinkedIn show 40% of all jobs advertised across the UK in November were hybrid roles. We didn't have to be in the office full-time. This is way more than any other nation in Europe, which is weird because it makes everyone so efficient. So surely everyone would be doing it, wouldn't they? Plus, we're going to talk about what the latest is in the Middle East. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is expected to begin talks today on brokering a second phase of the ceasefire with Hamas. He's visiting the Trump administration in Washington, D.C., meeting with Trump tomorrow. He'll be the first foreign leader to meet with Donald Trump. This, of course, after more hostages were released at the weekend in, again, more outrageous scenes, I would say. This is Talk. We are the home of common sense. Big welcome once again to Sam Armstrong, who is a conservative commentator.
I think that's fair.
Cap C, little c, whichever way you want to go. And he's definitely had his Weetabix this morning. And I mean, look, basically, the question we're asking today is about cozying up with the EU, right? Should we be cozying up with the EU?
What? Forget cozying up. This is a total, utter, unmitigated sellout to the EU. Each and every little piece of unfinished business that they had to deal with has been jumped upon, and they're going to get every single thing that they have asked for. Fishing, they're going to get. Our defence cooperation, they're going to get. And why do they want our defence cooperation? Well, surprise, if you haven't spent what you were meant to spend on defence for years, relying on the US, Donald Trump all of a sudden pulling the plug, now we're going to have to pick up the tab for it. This is giving them everything they want in exchange for almost nothing. Why does Keir Starmer think that he's going to be able to go to Brussels and get anything other than a deal which is good for them and bad for us? I can't believe that they're doing it so soon. This is a total and utter Brexit betrayal.
It is an absolute sellout, isn't it? And we know that's what he wants to do. I mean, he told us he spent 3 years as Shadow Brexit Secretary, desperately trying to take us back into the EU, or keep us in the EU, literally trying to stop the biggest democratic vote for anything ever in this country's history from actually taking place. He's not a Democrat. We know that for sure. He is a diehard Euro fanatic. But he's going to go. I don't have a problem with him going off and meeting with these EU leaders. I just want to know what is the private conversations, because we know that Keir Starmer, along with the Lib Dems as well, and frankly, Philip Hammond and other traitors. Yes, you, Philip Hammond, you were a traitor, even as the Chancellor under Theresa May. They were literally going to sort of behind the backs of the British negotiators throughout that period, basically undermining Britain's position. If all politicians had, as they pretended they would before the result and said they would after the result, had actually backed Brexit at that point and said, right, we are united, whether we agree with it or not, it's the democratic will of the British people, we are going to get the best deal. And they hadn't undermined, we would have got a better deal. But here's the thing. Youth mobility scheme, sort of, free movement by the back door, basically. Better trade with the EU. Well, great, but yes, it's the EU's our biggest trading partner as a bloc. Not, America is the biggest individual nation we trade with. America is booming. The EU is not booming. Yep. I mean, some of the Eastern European countries are doing okay because they're coming from poverty. Germany is in recession for the third year. It just seems to me this is not where we should be focusing things, and in particular with this US tariff trade war. Now, I don't approve of this. I think Donald Trump is quite wrong to do this. I understand there are reasons to have tariffs to protect key industries, and particularly against China when they just flood a market. No car manufacturing organisation can function in Europe or in America or anywhere in the West up against the cheap vehicles that are coming out of China. They're subsidised by the Chinese. They've got cheap energy because they've got coal-fired energy and all of that. You can't compete. So I understand some protectionism is needed to protect jobs. But this level of tariffs... Sorry, excuse me, apologies. I have the never-ending cold and cough. It's going to go on forever. Tariffs are 25% on his nearest neighbours. Yeah. Threats against the EU as well. I mean, what do we do to prevent that happening to us?
Well, Keir Starmer knows exactly what he wants to do, which is go off to Brussels and do these behind-the-scenes doors. And look, I happen to know that there is just as much sneakiness going on as there was last time. A few weeks ago, I was in a private members club in London, one of these snooty, very posh places.
Did you not fit in at all?
Well, I fitted in just fine, actually. But someone that stood out as a sore thumb was Nick Thomas-Symonds, the minister that's responsible for doing these deals. And who was coming to see him in this posh London club but Morgan McSweeney, the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff? And I was walking through it with a well-known Westminster journalist, and they could have looked like they'd seen a ghost. Exactly what is happening, it has happened before, is happening again. It is private deals, smoke-filled rooms, looking to do it in great secrecy. And that is why I am terrified. I'm utterly terrified that the vote that, as you say, 17 million people decided to back is on the verge of being betrayed.
The only thing is, if they did, they say we're not going to go back into the EU, not going to go back into the customs union, that's not going to happen, or free movement. To do that, you'd actually have to have another referendum. There's no way politically they could do that. But they know perfectly well that any deal, you'd have to know, well, what is the deal on the table from the EU? I mean, at that point, I mean, the EU could basically say, we'll have your firstborn, pay us £1 million each in gold ingots. I mean, James, they could demand anything they wanted, and there's no way we wouldn't have the much negotiated for hard-won Thatcher rebate either. We'd be paying more in, getting less back than we already did. We were always a net contributor. The deal would be awful, and it would open the doors again to mass migration from the EU. I mean, it's been bad enough having the level we've got from outside the world, the rest of the world. I mean, I don't think genuinely if there was a referendum, the British people vote for it. But they're a sneaky lot. Civil servants, the EU-loving Labour Party, and frankly most of the Tory party, certainly the Lib Dems, they are quite happy to sneak up us. We know they don't believe in democracy. They think they know better than us. They think technocrats and bureaucrats in Brussels know better than us. Dirty, bigoted British voters, apparently. They think we're awful. We're ignorant. We don't know what we're doing. We were duped by the Russians or some other nonsense. A big red bus duped us into voting for Brexit. And they would quite happily, for our own good, take us back in by the back door. One of the things I think is worst up is this looking to sign up to this EU law on carbon schemes. So basically adding more net zero dead weight to our already net zero dead weight economy. And this comes, by the way, this is glorious this morning. They set up GB Energy. One of their big achievements, Labour Party, setting up GB Energy, a company that no one really knows what it does. It certainly doesn't produce any energy. I mean, I think most people thought, they're going to set up GB. We're going to have... Don't you think most people thought GB Energy would be a national state-run energy company that would provide us with cheaper energy? No, it doesn't. No, it's just another quango. It doesn't produce anything. The boss of GB Energy, this is hilarious, in his first broadcast interview, Jürgen Meyer, couldn't find a single Brit to do the job, obviously. Really, he's their startup chairman. He said that this pledge of 1,000 jobs that Keir Starmer said, 1,000 jobs for Aberdeen, that's great for Aberdeen, but 1,000 jobs, he said, it would take 20 years to deliver that pledge.
Look,
I mean, this is an absolute joke.
Yeah, and the company cost 10 billion quid. Billion, not million, billion to set up, right? This is a vast amount of money. And look, let's be really clear. Net zero is now the Titanic sinking. This ship is going down. Let's say you believe everything about the climate that you're told, all the alarms.
We're all going to die.
Let's say you believe it all, right? When you've now got to the stage where China, India, Brazil, all of these countries which weren't doing anything before, still aren't doing it, but the US has also given up on it. Even if you accept everything they say, which I don't, the idea that we in Europe, and we're tying ourselves to Europe, or just as the UK, which make up 1% of global emissions...
We can live, but we're going to lead the world. Didn't you know? Did you not get the memo, Sam?
Julia, this is madness. It is bonkers.
It's always been madness.
And, say you accept everything about climate, wouldn't that money at this point be better spent on, building some seawalls or some flood defences?
Or nuclear power stations.
Or nuclear power stations, something that would actually deliver some jobs here at home, rather than filling up the Chinese factories that make the solar panels that despoil our countryside.
Quite apart from the fact, again, all of the solar panels and wind turbines are made in China. Again, coal-fired power stations. If I hear one more time from someone on the climate left, China is building more solar power panels and more wind turbines, and also more coal coal-fired power stations. It's madness. But also, big concerns that with energy shortages, and we are seeing that across Europe and across the world, that Norway is basically, they are big suppliers of energy when the wind doesn't blow, which it often doesn't. Well, they're not going to be able to. They've actually got a vote going on in Norway. They're looking at having a rule where, they don't supply to us. We would be cut off. I mean, we know France has threatened to cut off the Channel Islands before from electricity. I mean, we need to. We are entering a very, very dangerous, turbulent, uncertain time ahead, economically, politically, militarily, in every way. We need to be energy self-sufficient wherever we can, and it is insane to do anything else. I'm still bewildered by this. I just genuinely think most of the politicians pushing this stuff either A, don't understand it, or B, are just willfully bringing this about to destroy our country, or they're just religious lunatics about this, because it is a religious zealotry. But let me go back to the practicalities right now. US tariffs on Mexico, US tariffs on Canada, two biggest trading partners for the US. Tariffs on China, much lower, 10%, not 25%. Talk of tariffs against the EU. The EU, say German Chancellor Olaf Scholz saying, look, we can, this would be bad, but we can cooperate. What's the best thing we can do to avoid being hit by tariffs directly or indirectly?
Well, so far, and you won't hear me say this very often, credit to Keir Starmer, he does appear to be building a good relationship with Donald Trump.
There are lots of phone calls, we're told, by Donald Trump.
Lots of phone calls. We're expecting a meeting to happen in the next couple of weeks, and look, we should be encouraged.
Roll out the king, roll out Kate, do whatever you need to do.
But we should also be clear on this. One of the reasons why America is not targeting the UK as hard is because it doesn't have such a bad trade deficit with us as it does with other countries. And that's because we have, broadly speaking, been more pro-free trade than other countries around. And actually, where we do have problems, it's actually often to do with aeroplane parts, which is actually where we're part of the Airbus collaboration in Europe. So Europe has caused our problems. But the idea that then doing a deal with Europe, which obviously Donald Trump has got a big problem with the trade policies on, the idea that's going to make it better is for the birds. That is what is going to endanger us being hit with precisely the same tariffs that the EU is about to be hit with.
It really is terrifying, isn't it? Can we talk briefly about Ofsted? We'll talk about it a little bit later in the show as well. But we have this, awful, terrible tragedy with Ruth Perry, a head teacher whose primary school was downgraded from the top grading to the lowest grading Ofsted, and this, we understand from the inquest, was part of the reason why she took her own life. That's absolutely tragic. I have never thought for a moment that one individual taking their own life in these awful circumstances should ever be a reason why we change a national policy. We need to have gradings in schools as our parents have a clue. Not even that accurate, often not that recent. Often, you had some schools which weren't being graded for 10 years. Getting you ahead during that time, frankly, gone way downhill, or much better, haven't been regraded. But we're going from four different sort of grades to 5, and they're going to be graded on much more things. There's going to be more nuance. There's going to be a colour code. We're all going to have to learn that as parents as well. So glad I'm out of that now. I've only got a couple more terms and I'm done. But we know the National Education Union, which is the hard. Well, I don't think the members are largely hard left. The management of the National Education Union, it's the biggest teaching union. They are very hard left, and they have completely opposed this, which makes me think it must be a good idea. But so have head teachers' unions also opposed this, saying it all that still adds lots of stress. It's not necessarily an accurate representative of somebody, of a school and their work. My issue with this is that, neither necessarily are GCSE grades or A-levels, but we have to have some way of measuring students and putting them relative to other students. Your UCAS form, we've just gone through all of that fun and games for university. Your UCAS form or perhaps an interview you get for university, that may not be a fair representation on the day of whether you are a good or a bad student. But same as a job interview when you're 40. It may not be a fair, but that is how life is. We have to have a way of judging things. Do you think that this is just means that teachers basically don't want to be judged? They don't want parents to know whether they are a good school or a bad school.
Look, let's be clear. These teaching unions will not rest until there are no empirical grading systems whatsoever.
Of schools, of pupils.
This is what they've asked for again and again and again. It's abolish assessment. It's abolish any grading. And by the way, we want to make it impossible for you to ever fire us or dismiss us. Do you know what?
That is already impossible.
I think it is disgusting. I think raising children, I think educating children is the most important thing we do. I think we should pay teachers more money. But by the way, I think we should hold them accountable for how well their students do. Because we know from the likes of the Michaela Academy and other places that brilliant teachers, brilliant headmistresses and headmasters can make a phenomenal difference to the lives of young people in this country. And they can set them up for the future with all of the skills, all of the talent that they need to go out into a tough world and compete. But instead, we have to be subjected to head teachers on six-figure salaries telling us that they are so emotionally strained by the thought that every 4 years some inspectors would come to their school and assess, by the way, with all of that money, with those millions of pounds of taxpayers' money we've given you to educate kids, are you doing a good job?
Yeah, I mean, again, but also, it's not about you, it's about the kids and about parents who are trying to do the best for their kids. And by the way, of course, bearing in mind, and this is crucial, and I say this as someone who went to a comp, is the fact that you've got, like Keir Starmer, his school was a grammar school and then became a private school, his fees were paid. And the last Tory lot, virtually all grammar or private school. It is extraordinary to me just how many people in the political world don't want grammar schools. I'm with Theresa May on this, and one thing she was really right about, a grammar school in every single area. You've got to have selective education to help kids who are bright. We don't expect the England football team to train with some people who do five-a-side on a Sunday morning. Why? Because it would hold them back. Oh no, but it would make the five-a-side Sunday morning team so much better. Yeah, that's not an argument to hold the England football team back. It's absurd that the only area in our entire life in this country where we expect the good people, the brighter, the more talented people to basically help out at the bottom rather than be pushed up to their best, to reach their best ability, is in the world of education. And I think that in academia and academic ability, I find that so painful. And it's nearly always people who've gone to a selective school themselves who don't want selection for other people's kids who can't afford to buy their way into it. That's the thing that bothers me.
It's a form of child abuse to protect children from the reality that in life you're going to be judged, that there are hard realities that, look, I am not, you might struggle to believe this, the world's greatest footballer. I have come to that realisation without any great emotional harm. The same is true for academics. It's not to say you can't achieve.
You're not a fate. I know plenty of people who've got barely a GCSE to their name who live in a much bigger home than I do and have much more success in their lives. No one is going to be written off as a failure, but we're going to be judging different academic or other abilities. We need a way of judging, and we need a way of judging the schools and when they do it. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, but also want to hear your thoughts on Macron telling us that Keir Starmer's appearance at a key EU summit tonight shows that Brexit has failed. What is your reaction? Should Keir Starmer be cozying up with Emmanuel Macron and Olaf Scholz, who, by the way, is going to be out on his ear in 3 weeks' time in Germany in the elections? Should he be cozying up with the EU when actually the booming economy is over the other side of the Atlantic in America? Shouldn't he be cozying up with Donald Trump? I want to hear from you. What do you think? Do you think there's an ulterior motive? What do you think's going on? What should we be doing? Give us a call, 0344 499 1000. Text the word talk in your message to 87222. Get in touch with us on X at Talk TV. Calls are charged at the national rate. Text costs one standard network rate message. We'll get to those calls up next. This is Talk.
runway in Britain was built in the 1940s. No progress in 80 years. A third runway could increase potential GDP by 0.43% by 2050.
Could a new runway be built that abides with carbon targets, concerns around noise pollution and concerns around air pollution?
That a third runway at Heathrow would unlock further growth, boost investment, increase exports and make the UK more open and more connected.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk, the Home of Common Sense, with me, Julia Hartley-Brewer. Thank you so much for joining me. Sam Armstrong's still with me. Let's get straight to your phone calls, coming in thick and fast on 0344 499 1000 about Keir Starmer basically cozying up with the European Union. Macron is in, it's because Brexit's failed. Yeah, thanks for that. Lovely little manual. Bye-bye. Thanks for coming. Let's go to the phone lines. Laura Jane is in Hampshire. Hello, Laura Jane. What do you want to say?
Hi,
hello.
It's your friendly conspiracy theorist here.
Oh, we're back to those again, Laura Jane.
Back to those again. No, I think that there are 2 points about this cozying up to the EU. One, I think genuinely that the Labour Party, and obviously represented by Keir Starmer, are globalists.
Yeah.
Effectively, and going back into the EU represents a small part of that. And the second thing is that when you go back into the EU, as we know, there are so many rules and regs. We literally have our hands tied and our feet tied, and there's nothing we can do. And a representation of that, and I know that you're not really talking about this at the moment, but our council elections in May have been cancelled.
Yeah.
They're not possibly being cancelled. They have been cancelled. And the changes that they want to make to the sort of layering of how it all works, I think is all part of the same plan.
Now, you see, I get, and you know, we've disagreed on these issues before, the council elections, it's absolutely crazy to spend millions having council elections when about 6 months later you're going to be making big changes. I don't agree with Nigel Farage on this one, that this is a big, conspiracy and it's anti-democratic. I just don't think it's an issue, and I'm all in favour of having a layer of bureaucracy taken out, if that's what ends up happening.
Well, I just think that, we haven't got I didn't vote. I've only been where I'm living now for the last 18 months. I moved from London. I'm retired and on the next stage of my life, I hope. And I didn't vote for the council, which is basically Lib Dem. Our MP is Conservative, but I would like the opportunity to have a different...
No, and I agree, and again, I think these things, it'd be nice if these things could be done sort of between those votes, but I think on this one, I mean, God, I don't give Labour much succour on many things, but I think on this one, I don't have an issue with it. But I think you're right, though. Labour, Keir Starmer, they are all globalists. They don't really believe in borders. They think there should be sort of global running of everything, and that is an issue.
I mean, one area where I'm sort of sitting on the fence is the young people. My children are 32, 30 and 26.
Yeah.
And the youngest, their dad is Belgian. He lives here, but he's Belgian, and they speak fluent French and English. They're very, very lucky in that sense. And my youngest is always saying to me, but you don't understand. Now, I can't just go and get a job in Brussels or one of my cousins.
No, you can't. Yeah, and neither can the whole of Poland or Romania come and get a job here.
Yeah, but I mean, what about if there is some... My eldest, he was at the Royal Ballet School. He's now still a trained ballet dancer. He would, there are companies that he would not have access to. Yeah. And I just wondered if the brightest and the best, or the best in their field, for want of a better word, what's wrong with them coming here?
Yeah, well, that's the thing. I don't... But you can still get visas. It's like the idea we're not in the EU, effectively, union with America, but people manage to go and get visas to work in America. there are ways of doing it. I mean, so I just think it's just abject nonsense. But the point is, our great political leaders seem to think that we should just have a wide open door to anyone who wants to come and drive an Uber here. And I'm sorry, I don't think that's good for our economy. Laura Jane, so good to talk to you again. I appreciate that. Thank you. Let's go to Mark, who is in Glasgow. Hello, Mark. What do you want to say?
Hi, good morning. Basically, there's not a strategic bone in Starmer, etc. They haven't really got a clue.
That's
as
true.
you can see from the fact they've swung from saying one thing to 180 degrees on all of their policies.
Yeah.
The truth is that I do believe, and it's witnessed by the fact that Mandelson, the political appointee who is fervently EU supporting,
yes,
because his background has been made the US ambassador.
I mean, he's still got his EU pension, of course, as a commissioner.
And they're not allowed to say a bad word against the EU if you are an ex-EU technocrat.
So I'm so pleased you brought that up. Genuinely, as part of your deal, having once being a commissioner, he doesn't get his, and it's a whopping great pension as well. He can only get that if he doesn't ever criticise the European Union, which means he can't represent all on his. But I mean, what did you make about his appointment? I mean, he's Mr. Blairite and massive links with China. And big mates with Jeffrey Epstein long after he had a conviction for basically being a paedophile.
Right, well, in truth, what we've got here, and I've done a little bit of homework this morning, Tony Blair and the subtly named Tony Blair Institute for Globalization, etc., is directing Starmer. Tony Blair was miffed that he was never got the chance to be made president of the EU.
Totally.
And in doing so, he failed to become president of one of the great sort of national blocs, as in USA, China, etc. And this is what's driving Starmer. God knows what has been promised. But the Institute has swollen by about 15% in numbers. Tony Blair's, who funds them, who knows, Institute for Globalization, etc., has swollen from 600 and so staff to now 720 staff in 6 months.
Very interesting.
I wonder what they're all doing.
I wonder what they're all doing. Well, advising Peter Mandelson, no doubt. Sorry, Lord Mandelson. Mark, fascinating call. Thank you. Let me bring in Sam Armstrong on this because, I mean... Peter Mandelson's appointment, again, I mean, he was someone vying for the job, and he was vying for the Oxford Chancellorship as well. He wants a big role. But his appointment, I mean, he's been incredibly rude about Donald Trump. It's a very political appointment. Normally, these are ambassadors. Our ambassadors tend to be civil servant figures rather than political. Huge concerns have been raised about his close links with China, his funding, what he's been earning his money as a consultant since. I've got some question marks about Tony Blair's funding as well, for his Global Institute for Global Change, is its full title. But also the fact that it's quite clear Peter Mandelson continues to have close links with Jeffrey Epstein long after Jeffrey Epstein had a criminal conviction and served time behind bars for trafficking an underage girl. I mean, as we now know, Prince Andrew continued long after. I mean, we all knew that anyway, didn't we? Let's meet and play together again soon. I mean, nobody who stays friends and in close contact with someone who's got a conviction like that has got the sort of judgment that they should be the British ambassador to, frankly, Kazakhstan, let alone the US.
You can judge a man by the company he keeps. And
yes, and we do.
For 2 decades or more, Peter Mandelson has gone through political life, actually strangely unfettered by the constant stench of sleaze and corruption.
Had to resign twice from government.
That follows him everywhere he goes. And he didn't just have to resign twice from government for mucking things up. He had to resign twice from government for being involved in dodgy financial situations. Yep. Now, look, there was nothing criminal, there was nothing wrong, but it was enough that he had to resign from government. He then goes into the private sector. He takes more Chinese clients close to the government than anybody else in British public life. And then he goes up for the University of Oxford, is roundly rejected at a normally left-wing institution in favour of William Hague for that post. And then, oh no, doesn't matter. I'm now going to be the ambassador to the United States.
And it turns out I really quite like Trump after all.
It doesn't matter how many times he resigns. It doesn't matter how many times he fails. This guy always seems to climb the greasy pole.
I'd suggest this is a man who knows where some bodies are buried. That's what I'd suggest. Love to hear your thoughts on that, folks. 11:35 is the time. We're going to take a quick break. Up next, going to talk to the brilliant economist and journalist Liam Halligan about these tariff war. What's going to hit Britain? How are we going to get and how do we avoid it? We're also going to be talking to former IDF spokesman about what possible ceasefire deal, the second stage of negotiations beginning this week. This is Talk, the home of common sense.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk, the home of common sense with me, Julia Hartley-Brewer. Sam Armstrong still with me. Delighted to be joined now by economist and journalist Liam Halligan. A very good morning to you, Liam.
Morning, Julia. Good to be with you.
Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Let's talk tariffs, shall we? Because the US president has, as we many expected, announced a whole load of tariffs, 25% on his neighbours, Mexico and Canada, 10% on China, threatening them on the EU. Everyone's saying they're going to retaliate. Nothing on us yet, because apparently Keir Starmer's been nice to Donald Trump. Tell us, what is the impact of these tariffs going to be, and what can we do to avoid the impact?
Well, it's worth saying that these tariffs on China aren't new. Even under Joe Biden, there were 100% tariffs on Chinese electric vehicle exports to the US, 50% on solar cells, 25% on electric vehicle batteries, steel and so on. But these new tariffs under Trump are much more sweeping, not just on China, another 10% across the board pretty much on many goods from China, and then also on Mexico and Canada as well. 25%. And you know, the EU is really worried. We've seen on financial markets today the shares in a lot of EU-based car makers really taking a nosedive because there's fear that Trump may extend those tariffs to the European Union. Certainly his rhetoric against the European Union has been pretty punchy, to say the least.
Yeah, he said that, you know, their behaviour is atrocious, outrageous. And this is basically like, you don't buy our American cars, but we take a load of European cars. It's like, well, maybe that's because your cars aren't as good as some of the European cars, people might say. But the key thing about tariffs is, I mean, free trade, we know, makes people richer. It keeps goods cheaper. It does have an issue for countries where they're competing with other countries that have got, say, lower wage costs, lower energy costs, lower regulation. But tariffs, we know, US consumers will be paying more for the goods that they import. I mean, they're going to have to pay higher prices, which is kind of the opposite of what Donald Trump promised at the election about helping people with the cost of living. So how's this going to go down with not just the Republican Party, but even with, MAGA diehards?
Yeah, just to finish off, even by Trump standards, the rhetoric against the EU is pretty punchy. And we used to say, don't take Trump seriously, but not literally.
Yeah.
But certainly he's following through on his rhetoric against the EU. So far, when it comes to the UK tariffs, he's making nice, if you want, about the UK, even with the prospect of Peter Mandelson coming in as our US ambassador. No love lost between them, though, of course, Mandelson's been crawling on his hands and knees in order to try and make amends against the UK. So we'll see when it comes to tariffs on the UK. Okay, in terms of tariffs in general, of course, the US has a history of imposing tariffs at key economic moments. Back in the 1930s, there was something called the Smoot-Hawley tariffs, named after the two congressmen who imposed them. They are what turned the great Wall Street crash in 1929, I believe, and many economists believe, into the Great Depression throughout the early and mid-1930s. Big American protectionism. We could see some of that now. Why? Because, at least in the short term, tariffs can protect domestic jobs at a time when we have massive competition from the emerging giants of the East, not least the Chinese, not least when it comes to electric vehicles and the whole net zero agenda general. So Trump could go for the kind of populist lever of imposing tariffs. Now, what do I think will happen? Trump's a really smart guy. Trump understands business. He started out as a Democrat, as you'll remember, Julia, but I do think in his bones he is a free marketeer. That may sound controversial now, but I do think in his bones. And I still believe that what he's doing at the moment is he is giving Mexico and Canada a bit of a shoeing, if you like, because he knows that he needs to really show that he means business when it comes to American borders, when it comes to cracking down on opiates in the US. And he says that a lot of the opiates, rightly so, come from Mexico and maybe also from Canada as well. Yeah. Is this a permanent situation? I'm not so sure. Look, if financial markets thought this was a permanent situation and America was going to go into a 1930s Smoot-Hawley isolationist bubble, right, we'd now be talking about a stock market crash around the world.
And we're not. And that's the giveaway.
It's like this is seen as a plus initial action, I think, for now.
So it's rhetoric and it's a negotiated sort of opening point. Now, the thing is, I can understand the tariffs on China because a lot of Chinese goods are coming because they are subsidised, slave labour in some cases, some of these industries. And you just think, well, you can't compete with that. And you should put tariffs on those sort of goods because it's unfair competition in that sense. But taking on, Canada, talking about Canada as, it should be the American 51st state. I mean, this is incredibly insulting. And I've got to be honest with you, if America was doing that to us and using that sort of rhetoric, I'd be saying 2 fingers up, I'll take the economic cost, I won't be treated like that. I mean, it really is demeaning. Mexico, we have got that porous border. We have got, you say the fentanyl, massive issues there coming over the border and the illegal migrants. I can understand the concerns there. But so do you think this is more of a sort of, he's talking tough, he's saying I'm in business, but he's expecting action from those other countries? But couldn't this get horribly out of hand? Couldn't this spiral?
It could easily get horribly out of hand. And let's be completely clear, this is more than rhetoric. He's actually imposed these tariffs today. That's why the stock, certainly on Canada and China, on Mexico, not yet on the EU. We have to be clear about this. Everyone's getting very excited and people lose sight of what's actually happen, which is why it's great that I know you're really interested in these issues, give a lot of time to this and we talk about it. It does kind of shock me as well, I got lots of relatives in America, lots of relatives in Canada. It would be like sort of England beating up the Welsh, I mean, it really wouldn't be on. But look, maybe it's because Canada's got a kind of wokey left-wing government at the moment. if you had a more centrist, centre-right government in Canada, maybe Trump would play nice.
As it does look like they will get later in this year.
Absolutely.
With the
So maybe he's just punishing, the libs, as he would call them, and even worse in private, of course. And then when the government of Canada changes, look, I don't know. No one really knows what's in his mind, and that's what a good business negotiator is like.
No, you say that. But one of the issues with Donald Trump, and we've seen this in negotiations, and actually he's not a great business negotiator. If the money he'd inherited from his father, he'd put that on the stock market, he'd be a richer man today than he is of all the deals he's done. Anyone who can lose money opening a casino is not a good businessman. Everyone needs to stop this absolute nonsense. He's also got this thing where he considers negotiations as a zero-sum game. I have to win, and I need you to lose for me to win. Whereas actually, for most people now, they see it as a win-win. Like, everyone can get a bit of what they want, and both can be mutually beneficial. That's my worry, is that he sees this as a zero-sum game. And for America to do well, we have to do badly. But actually, again, America's economy doing badly hurts all of us. America's economy doing well should help all of us, even some of these economies in the doldrums in the EU.
Of course, America remains the world's dominant economy. Certainly, it's the world's dominant economy if you're sitting in this country. I guess he's a decent negotiator compared to other sort of Western politicians like Biden, Starmer. Crikey, on his way to Brussels. So the bar is pretty low. Yes, of course, he was a daddy's boy who inherited lots of money. But let's be clear, he is taken extremely seriously, or much more seriously by Xi, by Putin, by Kim Jong-un. And he showed that in the first term. He got quite a lot done internationally. The liberal establishment didn't like it, but now they completely agree. Let's not forget, Julia, before Trump came in 2016, it was racist to even talk about China doing anything bad on trade when they were clearly nicking all our technology, IP theft, intellectual property theft. So I think he has moved the needle there. Look, what do I think? I think that he is going to make an example out of Canada and Mexico pour encourager les autres. And I'm using French deliberately because he will be saying to the EU, which of course is still a massive trading bloc, you want some of this? You want a shoeing from America like this? He started with Colombia. It took 2 hours for the Colombians to capitulate. The president sent his own plane with his tail between his legs. Canada and Mexico are obviously going to capitulate. Why? Because they're much less powerful economies than the US.
But the EU, it's basically like sit up, pay attention and do your bidding. Liam, it's going to be fascinating. I'd love to speak to you again on this. Liam Halligan, economist and journalist, thank you very much indeed for that. We're going to go to a quick break. 11:48 is the time. Up next, we'll be talking about the latest set of negotiations due to begin the second phase of that ceasefire deal for Gaza. But what is going to happen? That's up next. This is Talk.
Really serious questions, because actually it's not so much about the one individual occurrence, it's about the way that Keir Starmer behaves, it's about the way he treats everybody else as well, and it's about him taking the public for fools. I think these are big questions to answer for him, and I think he needs to get on with it as quickly as possible, because you know, when it comes down to it, trust is really important. He said it was his flagship thing to restore it. I think there are big questions to answer here, and I'm sure that your listeners and viewers do too.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Very good morning to you. This is Talk, the Home of Common Sense. I'm Julia Hartley-Brewer. Let's turn our attention to what is going on in the Middle East. At the weekend, we saw yet more hostage releases, and we also saw Israel, basically paying the ransom of releasing convicted prisoners. Still got a reminder for the BBC, Sky and ITV. Hostages, innocent civilians taken captive by a murderous terrorist organisation, not the same as prisoners who are tried and convicted in an Israeli court. Do try to keep up. But anyway, let's talk about what is happening with the next set of negotiations due to begin on the second phase of that ceasefire deal. Even, of course, we still haven't got, all of the 33 hostages released in the first phase. Jonathan Conricus is the former IDF spokesman and joins us now. Good morning to you, Jonathan.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining us. I have to say, I mean, some of the images of these hostages being released has just been absolutely harrowing and awful, particularly the young women being treated like, I mean, almost like scenes out of Hunger Games, being terrorised again. We've had some revelations about how both the women and the men have been held in their time in tunnels and the like, starved and beaten and the like. We're supposed to be moving on to the second phase of the ceasefire deal. Is there anything resembling enough trust for that second phase of talks to begin?
Yeah, just one word about, the conditions. Imagine spending 480 days in confined solitude underground in a tunnel with no air and extremely little food and no contact with human beings. That's what some of the Israeli hostages have told. And imagine being Yarden Biba's father, who used to have a family before, who now came back. He's been released out of Hamas captivity, but his wife and 2 baby children are not with him. So it's very, very mixed emotions in Israel. And
I must point out also, we still don't know whether his wife and children are still alive. He was forced by his own captives to announce that the IDF had, November 2023, in bombardment, had killed his wife and children. But we haven't had any verification for that. So the people are still holding out hope.
We are holding out hope, but we are not very hopeful, sadly. No. Most of the information indicates that they were murdered by Hamas. And this is a baby who was 9 months old when he was taken. I think the youngest hostage in history, definitely in Israeli history. Absolutely horrible. But so it's mixed emotions in Israel. If we go beyond that and talk about the politics and strategic bit, there's definitely, I mean, your last conversation was with an esteemed guest and you spoke about Trump, his decisions, etc. Trump wants a deal. Trump wants Israel not to continue the war, not to pursue the destruction of Hamas. And he wants a deal that will release hostages and not go back to fighting.
Yeah.
That's my understanding.
And he's made very clear by Benjamin Netanyahu meeting him tomorrow, the first foreign leader to meet him since his inauguration, that he is firmly backing Israel. Does that help any talks?
It helps, and of course I as an Israeli prefer to have it that way and not the other way around. But then at the end of the day, we Israelis are left with an issue here. The southern Israel is not safe. Israel isn't safe. Israelis are not safe as long as Hamas exists.
Yes.
Why? because that organization has an outspoken aim, strategic aim. The overall objective of that organization, why they exist, is to annihilate the state of Israel.
Yeah.
And I cannot say this, too many times, because people around the world, they refuse to acknowledge it and understand that what Hamas is about is to kill all the Jews and to annihilate Israel. And as long as they exist, we have a strategic issue on our hands, and getting hostages back, super important. We want that, but we also need to ensure long-term security.
Yes.
And there's a bit of a conflict here.
Well, that's it. There's also talk about reconstruction of Gaza, which has been basically bombed to smithereens in search of Hamas fighters hiding in that tunnel network underneath. But rebuilding it again, even some of the demands from the Hamas side. But they still need a network of tunnels. Oh, how convenient. One of the suggestions, certainly the Israelis have said they cannot accept Gaza with Hamas in charge. But let's face it, the Palestinian Authority, these are not moderate organisations. They also fully signed up to an awful lot of what Hamas wants to do as well. But there's lots of talk from Donald Trump of, why don't we just clear out the Palestinian people from Gaza? They're refugees anyway. They've been cleared out from elsewhere. Why don't Egypt and Jordan take them? More than half the population of Jordan is of Palestinian descent. Is that even remotely something on the cards, or is that actually something that neither Egypt nor Jordan nor the Palestinians want?
Well, neither of those. Well, maybe Palestinians in Gaza would want to, but then again, nobody's asking them what they prefer.
No.
It's always about how they can be used against Israel. If it had been about really the best interests of Palestinians, then there wouldn't have been an UNRWA, and they wouldn't have been relegated to continuous so-called that their refugee status for 4 generations now. Nothing good comes out of relegating people to be living on handouts and being dependent on international aid. You don't develop a future, you don't develop agency and a sense of ownership of your own destiny when you're on the handout. And Palestinians are kept in this state by the international community, by other Arab countries, sadly, mostly because they are being used by those countries and entities against Israel.
Yeah.
And that is very, very sad and unfortunate. And, bottom line, I don't think it will succeed because I think that everybody, Europeans, Arab countries, international institutions, they will go against it, not because it's necessarily bad for Gazans. It might be a good long-term solution to move people out and then get them back in, but that doesn't really matter.
No, indeed. I just don't think it's even viable for... We'd all love there to be peace. I'd love every innocent person to live in peace. But realistically, I don't think any other country in the world would ever dream of, or their people would certainly not allow their government to dream of, going back to, the status quo ante and having a situation where you've got a terrorist organisation whose sole aim is the destruction of not just your country, but every single person in it, and living on your border. I just don't see any... We wouldn't put up with it. The Americans wouldn't. The French wouldn't. No other country would. So it is extraordinary. Anyone expects Israel to do the same. Jonathan Conrick, so appreciate you joining us. Former IDF spokesman, Jonathan there. Sam Armstrong, listening to all of this, you've been absolutely staunch on this issue throughout. And again, I do not understand why anyone thinks that there are two sides to this. There just aren't. There really aren't. But I mean, everyone's calling for these more second set of talks. But I mean, the behaviour of Hamas, even with these hostage releases, has been abominable. Do you think there's any chance we're going to see a proper long-term peace?
I tell you why that Israel is expected to deal with it and no other country is. It's because Jews don't count. Jews don't count. If it was any other category of people that had suffered the atrocities for just attempting to live peacefully inside a democratically elected country, the only democratically elected country in the entire region, if it had happened to anyone else, it wouldn't be expected. Look, I think the deal is going to go ahead. I think Hamas is going to continue to behave abominably. And then when war is done, when all of this is done, it's going to go back to doing what it does best, coming up with every way to commit terrorist atrocities against the Jewish people.
Absolutely, I completely agree with you, Sam Armstrong. Thank you very much. Coming up next, we're going to get the latest headlines, so then we're going to be talking about whether we do or we don't have a blasphemy law in this country. Let's talk. This is Home of Common Sense.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
A very good afternoon to you. Welcome back to the show. This is Talk, the home of common sense. And whether you are listening on DAB+ radio or on your smart speaker, watching on YouTube or your connected device, it is, as always, wonderful to have your company. Coming up next, we're going to be talking about, blasphemy laws, because we got rid of blasphemy laws in this country quite some decades ago, but a man was arrested after a copy of the Koran was reportedly burned in Manchester city centre at the weekend. The book was set alight at a memorial commemorating the victims of the 2017 Manchester Arena bombing. Police say the 47-year-old man was arrested on suspicion of a racially aggravated public order offence. But how is burning a Koran a racially aggravated public order offence? And do we have a blasphemy law by the back door? Plus, we'll be talking about Lucy Letby. Lawyers for the former NHS nurse say new evidence to be unveiled tomorrow by a witness for the prosecution at her trial could prove she is a victim of a miscarriage of justice, as many have been claiming. The nurse is appealing her convictions for murdering 7 babies and attempting to murder 7 others in her care. Also, in the latest Woke Madness Network, Rail has told staff to stop using the word passengers as it issues new guidance to employees asking them to use less formal language in a bid to reduce customer frustration at train delays and cancellations. Oh, the guidance also says we should refer to not pregnant women, but pregnant people. Deep size, everyone, I have a funny feeling you just make the trains run on time and have the buffet car open. I think then we'd all be a little bit happier. But there we are. We'll talk about all of that coming up. Sam Armstrong is still with me, joining me throughout the show. Just before we get to our guest in this first guest in this hour about this, getting very, very worried about blasphemy laws in this country. We don't officially legally have one, but de facto we do we not? But only for one religion.
Yeah, and Keir Starmer was recently asked by one of his Muslim backbenchers whether or not we should introduce a ban on defiling images of the Prophet or indeed Muhammad, or indeed burning the Quran. And the answer he gave made me sick to my stomach.
Wasn't it?
He said we should look at it. Yeah. This is disgusting. It's disgraceful. It's the opposite of what we believe in this country, which is unless there's express laws, unless you're threatening violence against someone, you have the right to free speech. And you just notice it, don't you, just generally going around the country. It used to be when I grew up that people would go around and say, well, it's a free country, people can do what they do. I can't tell you the last time I heard someone on the street say it's a free country.
No.
We seem to have lost our sense that we live in a democracy, that we live in a freedom country in which we're free to do, to say,
and we're free to offend.
And we're free to offend. There's no law against offending someone.
I don't want to burn a Quran. I would not burn a Quran, but I would absolutely like to be legally entitled to do so, and also de facto entitled to do so, and not facing the rest of my life fearing for it. But let's talk about all of this with Lord Young. Toby Young's a Tory peer. He's also vice chair of the all-party parliamentary group on free speech in Parliament, and he's also, of course, founder of the Free Speech Union, of which I and indeed Sam Armstrong are also members. I want to declare that. Lord Young, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
It does feel weird calling you Lord Young, Toby. I've got to be honest with you. I'm not sure I'm going to keep it up throughout, but I'll do my best. I've always said I don't approve of the House of Lords, but if we're going to have it, I'd rather have people like you in it than not. So congratulations on that. Do we or do we not have a blasphemy law in this country? It's a simple question.
Well, officially, no. But we've seen, I think, a blasphemy law creeping in via the back door, but it's an Islamic blasphemy law, not a Christian blasphemy law. So, for instance, people are much more likely to be prosecuted for stirring up racial hatred, which is an offence under the 1986 Public Order Act, if they say something supposedly Islamophobic than if they say something anti-Christian. In the case of this man who was arrested in Manchester on Saturday, he's been charged with a racially aggravated public order offence, but that's not a crime that carries a custodial sentence in all likelihood.
Really? I mean, hurty tweets get you sent to prison.
Yes, the people who've been sent to prison for hurty tweets have generally been charged with stirring up racial hatred,
right?
Which is also an offence under the Public Order Act, but does carry a custodial sentence.
Right. Okay. But I mean, again, there is a video live stream capturing the burning of the book. I mean, this was beside the memorial for the 2017 Manchester Arena bombing, which cost many lives, including of young girls, at that Ariana Grande concert. I mean, we know how many of us were horrified by that. It was carried out. It was an Islamist terror attack by an Islamist activist who could have been stopped and could and should have been prevented. It seems to me that this man, we understand, from his personal beliefs, that this is someone who has every right to, if he wants to show his anger, his unhappiness with the teaching of the Quran, if he so chooses, in a free country, in the same way that someone is entitled to criticise the Bible, criticise Christian teaching, or indeed any other religion in this country. But as you say, although we don't have a blasphemy law, so someone wouldn't be prosecuted for, burning the Bible, realistically, the Quran is always treated different. The religion of Islam is treated differently. And we do, to all intents and purposes, Charlie Hebdo onwards in Paris, the Batley Grammar School teacher 4 or 5 years ago here in the UK, and lots of other instances, we do, to all intents and purposes, have a de facto blasphemy law anyway, which is the threat that if you do something that could be perceived by Islamist ideological extremists, of which we have many thousands in this country, as having blasphemed against the Islamic religion, the odds are you will face death threats, and in many cases we know actual attempts to actually hurt you and your family. That is a de facto blasphemy law, isn't it?
Yes, I mean, we certainly have mob enforced de facto blasphemy laws, and the worrying thing, Julia, is that sometimes the police and the authorities respond to that pressure in the name of preserving good community relations. We saw this a couple of years ago when a 14-year-old boy lost a bet with his friends, and his forfeit was having to bring a copy of the Quran into school. He bought one. He did that. The Quran got slightly scuffed in the school playground when he was playing with 3 of his friends, and there was an appalling overreaction within the local Muslim community. His mother was forced to attend what felt like a kind of public shaming, in which she appeared with a headscarf and had to bow her head before a group of angry Muslim men at a mosque. The police were there. They said they were taking it very seriously, and they recorded this as a non-crime hate incident. And the Free Speech Union intervened and asked the police to delete those NCHIs, and eventually they did. But that was an example, I think, of the boy in question received death threats from some members of the local community. The police didn't investigate them. They didn't record any of them as non-crime hate incidents, but they recorded the dropping of the Quran in a school playground as a hate incident. It was
it was extraordinary. The image of the senior police officers in there, basically, please don't kill this woman and her family. I mean, that was basically what the undercurrent of what was being said. And she's sort of sitting there with the scarf over her. And I sort of wondered, what would I do in that scenario? I remember being physically sickened by seeing that image. I'm thinking, what would I do? And I'm thinking, God, you know what? To save my child's life, to risk us being firebombed and death threatened out of our home in hiding for the rest of our lives, maybe I would have done that too. That is unacceptable. That is unacceptable in this country. And yet, it is the reality in this country. No teacher would dare to show, cartoons of Prophet Muhammad. God forbid, spend the rest of their lives in hiding with their families, their children. What is the solution, though? How do we change this? Because if we have, and let's face it, let's talk about this. We have imported this problem. It didn't just come out of the blue. We've imported people who sign up to a political ideology, which is what Islamism is, not just people who aren't Muslim, that's a different thing, who genuinely believe that the punishment for mocking or not correctly, respecting their imagery or their book or their solemn book, it should be punished by death. What do we do about that?
Yeah, I think the really difficult thing is that one of the reasons Britain has become such an attractive destination for Muslims from all over the world is that we have a long tradition of religious tolerance.
Yep.
You know, they can practice their religion in our country. They won't be persecuted. They won't be punished in any way. We are a very tolerant country when it comes to different faiths. We're a multi-faith society. And the problem is that many devout Muslims believe that tolerating the practice of their religion includes respecting their blasphemy codes. And one of their core blasphemy codes is that their holy book, the Quran, should not be desecrated, should not be disrespected or desecrated in any way. And they expect, as a corollary of being able to practice their religion unmolested, that they should be able to enforce their blasphemy codes on non-Muslims, including in particular apostates, people who've left the Muslim church.
Well, in particular, yes.
In particular, and that I think is clearly going beyond wanting to be tolerated and wanting to force others to respect your religious codes. Now, I don't think we as Christians would expect Muslims to respect our blasphemy laws. We wouldn't want to see them prosecuted if they took the name of the Lord in vain, for instance, and we repealed those laws several years ago. So I don't think it's right that they should expect Christians or non-Muslims or even apostate former Muslims to respect Muslim blasphemy codes. But that's a very difficult argument. It's a very difficult thing to persuade devout Muslims of.
Well,
they say, why should people be allowed to get away with doing something that profoundly offends us, that desecrates something we
But I don't think we should seek to persuade. I think we should simply ask the question, do you think that the punishment for this should be death? Well, maybe you shouldn't be here then. I mean, I'm really sorry. I really think we need to have... You couldn't be here if you don't sign up to our codes of conduct. Look, I'm an atheist. I've got to be honest with you. I have very little time for any religion. I'm an atheist for a reason. But I would never dream of disrespecting someone's book, their sacred book. I think that, frankly, it would just be rude, and I wouldn't do it. But I would defend the right of someone to do it and my right to do it. I wouldn't, for instance, I wouldn't burn my flag or any other nation flag. But I would defend the right of someone to do that because this is about free speech. We know things like that are protected, for instance, in the United States under their First Amendment. But when we had, as Sam Armstrong just mentioned, when we had the Prime Minister being asked by a Muslim Labour backbench MP, about having a sort of, bringing in possible blasphemy law to protect, and we knew that it was about protecting Islam, and the Prime Minister not saying, no, we don't have blasphemy laws in this country. That's not what we do. We believe in freedom of speech. He just sort of kowtowed to it. There is a real concern that, the de facto blasphemy law we have because people are terrified of being beheaded on their doorsteps, because that is what has happened across Europe and threats have been made here, will become a de jure, a real law of blasphemy, which will only really apply to this one religion because of kowtowing by... Let's face it, our politicians across the board. The Tories have been just as bad on this, frankly. How fearful are you of that at the Free Speech Union?
I think it's a genuine risk. We know that Yvette Cooper, the Home Secretary, wants the police to record more non-crime hate incidents against people who are, quote-unquote, Islamophobic. And we also know that the Labour Party has adopted the All-Party Parliamentary Group on British Muslims definition of Islamophobia, which is extraordinarily broad. Includes, for instance, pointing out that some members of grooming gangs are of Pakistani heritage. That, according to the definition that the Labour Party has officially embraced, is Islamophobia. So somebody saying that could find themselves with a non-crime hate incident recorded against their name if Yvette Cooper has her way and persuades the police that these things need to be recorded. Will it get worse than that? Will people actually be prosecuted? Well, the man who burnt the Quran in Manchester is clearly going to be fined. He's going to be he may not plead guilty, but I suspect he will to get it over with.
Are you in touch? Is Free Speech Union in touch with him and his lawyers?
We're not in touch with that particular gentleman, but we do have another case of an asylum seeker, a Muslim apostate, who burnt a copy of the Quran and recorded himself doing that and posted the recording on X. And he hasn't been charged yet, but he has been. He's still under investigation. He's on police bail, and we are trying our damnedest to get him off. But we haven't yet got in touch
because he hasn't committed a crime, which is why, that's the reality, isn't it? This is incredibly worrying. It really is. Lally, you've done fantastic work at the Free Speech Union on dealing with lots of things that very much on the sort of big in the in tray for Donald Trump at the moment on diversity, equity and inclusion, which basically just means sort of an awful lot of discrimination and inadequate in hirings an awful lot of the time. What did you make of banks and investment firms and city bosses hitting out at the Financial Conduct Inquiry, saying that they want the financial regulator to scrap their diversity proposal, saying it's just going to create jobs in HR, it's not going to help us succeed and create jobs and create wealth, and it's just basically more stranglehold regulation. What do you make of that?
Well, I'm not at all surprised. The Free Speech Union also submitted a response to that consultation, and we made very much the same argument. If this government really is serious about wanting growth, why would they want to fetter financial services companies by insisting that they do more to promote diversity, equity and inclusion? What's that got to do with financial services? I mean, it seems ridiculous overreach on the part of the regulator. So we push back hard against that. It's good to see other people finally breaking cover and publicly pushing back against it. The faculty of insurance and insurers and actuaries, they had a similar consultation. They were proposing to do almost an identical thing. We pushed back against that. Others did too, and they've now just announced they're not going to do it. So it is possible to persuade these regulators not to overreach in this way. And I'm hoping that the Financial Conduct Authority will see sense and not introduce this particular proposal.
The tide does seem to be turning, but I think we've got a long way out. Just finally, you and I were on the same side on the Brexit debate, pushing for Brexit back in 2016 and fighting again in 2019. Last Friday, we saw the 5th anniversary of the actual departure of the UK from Brexit, from the EU. Barely a mention from the government, certainly no celebrations. Mind you, they were pretty muted from Boris Johnson on the night that we did actually leave. Now we've got our current Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, heading off to Europe. He's going to have dinner with the EU leaders, trying to sort of get back in, cozying up with them once again, wants to get back in with them with pacts on defence and the like. We know he'd like to have this sort of youth scheme would enable sort of young people in Europe to be able to freely move, freedom of movement by the back door. President Macron, the French president, his aides have said that he views Keir Starmer's appearance today as showing that Brexit has failed. Are they right?
They're not, Julia. We certainly haven't taken advantage of it in the way we might have done, in the way that you and I hoped we would. Regulatory divergence, for instance, not having to impose the EU's red tape in the UK has meant, in many cases, UK regulators imposing even more red tape than was imposed on us when we were in the EU, which is a horrific outcome that I hadn't anticipated. But it looks as though Donald Trump's warning that he may not impose tariffs against the UK, but he intends to impose tariffs on the EU, is a pretty clear message to Keir Starmer that if you do get back into bed with the EU, if you do effectively get back into the EU in all but name, then you're going to face some tariffs too. So hopefully that shot across Keir Starmer's bows will give him pause before plunging back into the EU.
We would certainly hope so. Thank you very much. That's Debbie Lord-Young, Tory peer, Vice Chair of the All-Party Parliamentary Group on Free Speech and also founder of the Free Speech Union. A quick response to all of that from Sam Armstrong.
It's a mouthful of a title now for Toby, isn't it?
Yeah.
He's got a lot of things, a lot of notches under his belt now.
I find it very strange when people I've known for years now have titles.
Well,
as you know, I'm holding out for Empress. I won't take any no second best for me.
Any day now.
Imperial Majesty or nothing.
Of the Independent Republic of Mike Graham. He's going to put you in charge. It could happen.
There has been a lot of talk over the last few years about people forming our cabinets.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think we'd have you in.
Really?
I think I'd have you as Chief of Staff.
Oh, I'll take that.
Yeah.
I'd like that.
Oh, yeah, I'd have you organising stuff.
That'd be fun.
Be terrifying. But anyway, what do you make particularly on the Brexit issue? We talked about the blasphemy law in advance. So
yeah, well, look, I think on Brexit we have to be clear. We are now staring down the barrel of a total and utter betrayal. What I don't think we'll see is a formal reversal of Brexit, but we will end up with what we could have ended up years ago, what Keir Starmer, what so many others wanted, which is Brexit in name only, BINO as it used to be called. They're going to slip us in one by one.
We get no say. But we would have to
rule takers. And the whole point was that we would have some freedom to actually make our own policy, and that's what they'll give up first.
Yeah, well, that's the whole thing about, the Keir Starmer, that new book. So, he's an HR manager, not a leader. He hasn't got any belief in this country. He's got no belief in the British people and our economy, and it's just a technocrat and a bureaucrat. That's all he is, and that's why he can't think of anything better. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. We're going to get to your calls on this up next. 0344 499 1000. Does this mean that Brexit has failed? What do you make of Keir Starmer cozying up to Emmanuel Macron? We'll talk about that. Also going to be talking about these yet more evidence, we're told, that shows that Lucy Letby was wrongly convicted of attempted murder and murder of just so many newborn babies. Also taking place right at this moment in the courts. Former British soldier Daniel Khalife is being sentenced on spying charges for Iran, but also prison escape charges. We'll bring you that sentence as soon as we get it. This is Talk. We are the home of common sense.
Every time the Prime Minister goes abroad, which is quite a lot of the time, he gives our money and our powers away and seems to take leave of his senses. I'm very worried going to Brussels, he's going to give away all sorts of concessions simply to get talks. Yeah. It's always the EU strategy. Hang tough, make Britain submit, and then say, well, maybe we might find a crumb from the table after you've sent us a full meal.
Yeah.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Very, very good afternoon to you. This is Talk, the home of common sense. 12:26 is the time. I'm Julia Hartley-Brewer. He's Sam Armstrong. Right now, the former British soldier Daniel Khalife is being sentenced on spying charges and prison escape charges. Remember, he spectacularly escaped from prison, hiding underneath a vehicle, and was managed to evade, I think, for like 72 hours, and then eventually was found. But he is now being sentenced for his actual spying for Iran. As soon as we do actually get the sentence handed down by Woolwich Crown Court's Mrs Justice Chima Grubb. We'll bring that to you straight away. Right now, let's go to your calls. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. Particularly, we're talking about Keir Starmer's basically appearance at this EU summit, cozying up with the EU. Macron says that this means Brexit has failed. Shouldn't we be cozying up with Donald Trump and a booming American economy, especially with those tariff threats? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Do get in touch. 0344 499 1000. John is on the line. He is in Bradford. Hello, John.
Hi, good afternoon. How are you?
Very well indeed. What do you want to say?
Right, there's a number of things. I mean, Keir Starmer is just a waste of space. I mean, he'd sell us out tomorrow for tuppence, basically. People have got to realise that we paid up to £29 billion to leave the EU, and we're going to get that money back, number one. And number two, the EU have run up trillions and trillions and trillions of euros in debt, and we're going to have to share that bit. And what happens to all the countries that we've done trade deals with? If we're going to have to back off this now, how are they going to trust us in the future?
Yeah, well, yeah, I mean, the thing is, you've got a man who spent 3 years trying to get us to not leave the EU. He's going to do anything he can to get us back in again, by hook or by crook, isn't he?
Well, I think so, yes, and I think he's a downright traitor, and I think he should be charged as such.
Well, I mean, he's not. I mean, I've said it was my view that genuinely, when he became Labour leader, that he was unfit for public office because he had betrayed democracy. You know, if everyone agreed to abide by the Brexit vote because they thought that they were going to win it on the Remain side, and they didn't. I mean, that means you're not a Democrat.
Well, I voted in favour of staying in the EU, but if I had the referendum now, I'd certainly vote to stay out.
Do you know what's so funny? I keep hearing, and polls keep telling us that people have said, oh, Brexit's failed, it was a mistake to leave the EU, and everyone's changed their mind. A, I've never met anybody who voted for Brexit who has told me that they have changed their mind. B, I meet so many people who voted for Remain, who then, by the way, voted for Get Brexit Done because they thought it was outrageous, it hadn't been pushed through properly. But also, and all the battles over it for those 3 years, but also they would be in favour of it now. It is extraordinary. Shouldn't we be cozying up to Donald Trump, though? I mean, as such as I don't want to be a supplicant to the United States, but we need to accept they are the biggest economy, aren't they?
Yes, I do, and I think we should have have trade deal with the United States of America. And I'll tell you something, Julia. If he said to British people, "Come over here now, because you've had enough in the UK. We'll give you what we know. We'll give you a life in the USA." I think a lot of people would go. There is, I mean, the biggest export of people at the moment is British people going to live abroad because they've had enough of this country and the way it's going.
Yeah, and my big worry, especially, is when we look at those immigration figures and these predictions. We talked about it a lot last week, that actually, again, that's always net migration. We ignore the fact that actually far more people are coming, but we're also losing a lot of our good people, the brain drains, the entrepreneurs, young people who can easily get a visa anywhere because anyone would take them. And I'm worried so many of our young people, my God, I'm really hoping my daughter doesn't do this, are going to want to go and work abroad and work elsewhere because they feel there's a better future. John, thank you so much for your call. Let's go to Mark, who is in Lincolnshire. Mark, you want to talk about the blasphemy law issue we've just been discussing with Toby Young.
Yeah, indeed, Julia. Hi, by the way.
Hello.
Hi. Yeah, what it is, Madoc, is I watched that whole video, and it's absolutely appalling.
Of the burning of the Quran,
Yeah, how that all played out was absolutely ridiculous. I mean, it was disgusting. For a start, what he said at the very beginning is that he's doing it in memory of his friend Salwan Momika, who was obviously the chap that got himself shot in Sweden, doing the same thing. So that's why he was doing it to start with anyway. And what happens in that video is what is believed to be a Muslim gentleman comes over, remonstrates with him personally. You can't do that. You can't do that. Which obviously he can. Yeah. There's no law saying he can't do that. So anyway, this goes on from there. This chap then, the camera kind of follows this Muslim chap who goes up to a police car, reports what he's witnessed to the police car. The police go tearing off. Then the camera follows round, and at this point the police car pulls up. These two officers leap out, and I think it is important, it's sad for me to say this, but it is important. The two officers that get out are Asian. They get out.
I don't think that would probably be relevant, but okay.
Well, it might have some relevance. I don't know, Juliet. What I saw, I'm only saying what I saw in that video. Two officers got out. They both appear to be Asian. They get out without question. Now, bearing in mind, they haven't witnessed anything, these two officers.
Yeah.
They've had a report from this one gentleman. They get out of the car, they leg it over, they slam this guy against the shop front. They've got the cuffs on. They haven't asked him a damn question about any of this.
And he's not being violent. I mean, that's the thing. But also, Christian, I mean, if you're going to question anybody, what about questioning somebody, criticising somebody in the street for carrying out their legal rights? But this is the thing. Most people in this country think it is a crime, and that's the really scary thing. And again, doing that, incredibly brave, because in all likelihood there will be death threats against this man, but there won't be arrests of the people making the death threats.
Well, this is the thing, isn't it, at the end of the day? Because the way that I've always been looking at this is, if you have to keep bending over backwards, if you have to keep throwing appeasement after appeasement to try and satisfy what is essentially... Because, honestly, Julia, from what I've experienced with people from the Muslim community, the average Muslim, I don't think, really gives two hoots about this kind of thing.
No, we're talking about Islamist ideologies, which is a political movement, and again, it's certainly not race-based. That's for sure. I'm with you all the way. I think it's genuinely just outrageous, and we need to stand up to it, because it is properly scary. And again, it's one thing people saying, "Oh well, I won't do this because it's against the law," which it shouldn't be. But actually, the reason why people don't do it is because they don't want to spend the rest of their lives living in terror and fear from death threats. And that is unacceptable, but there never seems to be any action against the people making those threats. I'm going to have to leave it there, but I so appreciate your call, Mark. Thank you very much indeed. 12:33 is the time. Just to remind you that we are seeing right now the sentencing at Woolwich Crown Court of the former British soldier Daniel Khalife. He is being sentenced on charges that he was found guilty of spying for Iran, but also he pleaded guilty himself to his prison escape while he was being held on remand on those charges. He's being sentenced for both those crimes at the current time. We're going to be talking about that, and indeed Lucy Letby, who's got her, more evidence apparently we're told is going to be presented tomorrow about her apparent innocence for the crimes for which she is convicted. We're going to be talking to former criminal barrister Helen Fields about all of that up next. This is Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Very good afternoon to you. This is Talk the Home of Common Sense. 12:36 is the time. I'm Julia Hartley-Brewer and Sam Armstrong's still with us, and delighted to say we're joined by former criminal barrister and author Helen Fields in the studio as well. Very good afternoon to you. Lovely to get to see you in person. Two cases I want to talk to you about. One actually ongoing right now. Daniel Khalife, he's the former British soldier who has been convicted of spying for Iran against Britain, providing them with key bits of information which could have been of use to the Iranians, and also, of course, his prison escape, famously clinging to the bottom of a lorry coming out of prison and getting to freedom, but only, I think, for 72 hours before he was found. He's being sentenced right now, having fled Wandsworth Prison. That was back in September 2023. He was on remand, but he's being sentenced by Mrs. Justice Chima Grubb at Woolwich Crown Court. Realistically, what sort of sentence would he be getting, particularly, obviously, for the rather more important charge of spying against his own country while a serving British soldier?
Yeah, well, I mean, that carries a maximum of 15 years. We've got to remember that the things the judge is going to be thinking about is that some of these offences happen at the age of about 17 and 20. He was relatively young. He's
an adult at 18.
He is.
You're old enough to pick up a weapon in the army.
You absolutely are. But the judge will take that into account because she looks at a range of different things in terms of sentencing. Primarily, of course, she's going to be looking at the potential harm that could have been caused. So that really relates to giving out the details of serving soldiers.
So that's what he did. So, I mean, he was very new to the army as well,
yeah.
And he was able to get hold of information about serving special forces.
Yeah, he's a young man who seems to have a history of being able to cheat whatever system he's inside, and he clearly looked up ways of doing it. I mean, he went through HR and, went through all sorts of bizarre back routes to get that information. But he did use it, he did send it. It's incredibly serious. The judge is going to have to mark that. 15 years is the maximum, and whilst I don't think he'll go quite up to the maximum, there was a trial. He is going to be in serious trouble. He is going to be spending...
He could potentially put fellow soldiers' lives at risk.
Yeah,
I mean, that is... I think most of us, most of us, I'm pretty sure right now, are shouting at the radio going, what do you mean only 15 years maximum? I mean, treason, right? It's treason.
I know.
I mean, that's but what was his motivation, do we know? Because he was in contact with someone from the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, was he not? I mean, but what was his motive? Was it ideological? Was it for money? Did he think he was some sort of James Bond character? Wasn't there some talk that he wanted to be a double agent at one point?
Yeah, he contacted MI6 and MI5 and wanted desperately to be picked up as a double agent. This is really fantasist stuff. It's not very clever, yes. It wasn't very well done. It was clumsy. It was quite naive, to be honest with you.
But could have cost British lives.
Yes, but still, stupidity doesn't mean that people aren't dangerous. But it is fantasy stuff, and he seemed to want to be covering himself with glory from a very early stage. And when he couldn't get attention from one source, he couldn't get attention from the Iranians, he went back to the army, went to MI6, didn't get attention there.
It was sort of, look at me, look at me.
Absolutely.
Well, he said he got attention when he escaped from prison, and he was held on remand, wasn't he, in September 2023. He strapped himself to the underside of a food delivery lorry and managed to escape. There was a big manhunt at the time, and then huge security lapses at the prison being then exposed. And was it 40% of the staff, the prison officers on duty that day, just hadn't bothered turning up, which shows quite how bad things were. I mean. He'll have a concurrent sentence for that, we know, so that went add to it. Sam Armstrong, I mean, you're listening to all of this. Again, don't you think most people would say you can commit... Well, I mean, it doesn't matter what the charge is, it's treason, right? To sell information or give information. Did he sell it or give it?
Well, he received some money.
He did receive some money, which could risk the lives of your fellow British soldiers. I mean, it's amazing that isn't just throw away the key time.
Well, back in the day, it would have seen you swing from the noose. But I think what strikes me about this case is this kid is an idiot, right? He's a joker, right? He's literally emailing MI6 saying, I'm doing this, and no one's picking up the emails, etc., etc.
Bit of a worry, that.
He's a clown. How has this person been able to so thoroughly humiliate the entire security apparatus of this country? Not only the fact he was able to do this for 2 years, not only the fact he told them he was doing it, they didn't do anything, but when they finally eventually lock him up, he seems to waltz out of a secure prison in the heart of our capital, and it leaves you wondering, just how open are we to espionage by people who, frankly, aren't a character, as his own barrister says, owes more to Scooby-Doo than he does to James Bond?
I think the answer is very wide open. Helen, do you think?
Yeah, you know, one of the things the judge is going to have to do is pass a deterrent sentence, because whether or not this young man was a fantasist and whether or not he was misguided and frankly fairly stupid doesn't mean that other people can't exploit the same loopholes and the same system.
And
so we've got to make sure that
if
doesn't happen again.
If a stupid person can manage this and escape from prison, that would suggest that people who are clever and who've got more help could perhaps help. It does seem like there was certainly a message sent on the Telegram social media system while he was out. There were 72 hours from prison to an Iranian contact saying, "I'm waiting." So I mean, you know, I wait or something. So goodness knows what he thought was going to happen there. Another case, again, never leaves the front pages, never leaves the news, is in relation to Lucy Letby, the NHS nurse. She was originally convicted of murdering 7 newborn babies in her care and attempting to murder 6 others. She's since had another conviction for attempting to murder another baby. So 7 babies murdered, 7 attempted murder. But from pretty much day one, there have been people saying, no, she's an innocent woman. We've got very sort of well-known people like the Daily Mail columnist Peter Hitchens. We've got Tory MP David Davies and others. We've now also got new evidence going to be presented today, we understand, by one of the sort of scientific medical experts who was actually used as a prosecution expert in her trial. And this is Dr. Shu Li. He's a retired neonatologist. He's only newly retired. He's going to unveil details of an independent review into the causes of death and the non-fatal collapses of the children she's accused of harming, and suggest that actually a lot of his evidence was misrepresented in court. Talk us through this.
Yeah, so what happened actually was that a report or some documentation that he prepared was presented as part of the prosecution case. He's saying that basically the context was wrong and it was presented in a way that didn't accurately reflect the real meaning of the work. So the jury was misled? Done. Yes. I mean, it's not quite that cut and dried, I don't think, because it's really that evidence in that report formed part of a whole web of kind of, information and evidence that was used to convict Lucy Letby. But the point is that this Dr. Shu Li has really become quite interested in this case. He's helped compile a panel of different experts. It's not just his evidence now.
And they've started again. They've looked at the cases because originally police had a whole number of babies who tragically died, and they kind of looked at every single one, and then they narrowed down to the ones that they thought were possibly not natural deaths. And of course we did have this big spike in the number of children that were dying in this neonatal unit when Lucy Letby was there. And then so much of the focus in the media has been that, well, Lucy Letby was the only nurse who was on duty on each occasion when these babies that there were prosecutions related to died. That, of course, was not actually something that was a key part of the case against her. This sort of statistical, well, it couldn't have been anyone else because she was the only one. That wasn't the actual evidence presented in court that got her convicted, that the jury heard month in, month out, considered in great detail. And bearing in mind, they gave not guilty verdicts in some of the cases. Some of the babies whose deaths or attempted murders were part of the case. They also gave, we cannot come to a conclusion. There was a very thoughtful verdict. It wasn't, it must have been her, tick, 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 was it? I think a lot of the criticism of the evidence in the case ignores the weight of evidence there was against her.
Yeah, I mean, it's very misleading to say, well, somebody got the statistics wrong and in fact she wasn't on duty for, X amount of shifts and this sort of thing. It is a very big picture here. And when you go back and you remember actually what was happening, there were doctors, the senior consultant on that ward and other doctors were making complaints more than a year, I think, before.
And being forced to apologise.
And were forced to apologise. But people were flagging odd behaviour. Those weren't people who were just looking at the shifts and saying, well, this tallies with this event. These were doctors with decades of experience who were saying something feels very wrong here, we're not happy.
And people walking in with an alarm going with a baby clearly not breathing and her standing there, not doing anything, not in shock, but just standing there calmly. We've got things like that which add to it. But there's been an appeal already. There's been there's another appeal going. There's been an inquiry with lots of evidence being taken, huge campaigns in various different newspapers and the like. I mean, I don't know. I wasn't on the jury. I'm not an expert on this. I don't know whether she's guilty or innocent, but I do trust the jury system. But we know we know that people get it wrong.
Yeah.
We know that. She didn't offer much of a defence. Interestingly, she didn't take the stand herself, of course, giving her defence, although she was cross-examined. But I'm quite happy for there to be a sort of an open appeal, so that we need to put this to rest.
Yeah.
But do you think there's an element where actually some people will never be satisfied?
I think people occasionally convince themselves of something. I do wonder if they would be quite so irate, and this is going to sound very harsh, if Lucy Letby looked different.
I've always thought this. She just looks lovely, nice girl.
Yes,
Doesn't
she
look
was
like
called
she
Nice Lucy. They referred to her as Nice Lucy at some point in the papers. But, you know, it is really important. So the first thing, and the really important thing, is to make sure that the verdicts were right.
Yeah.
We do need to do that. There's no point for anybody, including the parents of those babies, for getting this wrong.
But also, there could have been things that are happening in those hospital wards which could have been changed, and we could prevent future deaths. But also, maybe there is someone else out there who is killing or attempting to kill these babies who is still at large.
So we need to get it right. But we do have to remember that there is clear evidence, really clear evidence, that these babies did not die natural deaths.
Yeah.
At least some of them very clear. I mean, some of the evidence was, and forgive me, but some of the evidence was actually one of the babies had suffered terrible internal trauma, the like of which you would see in a car accident, and, you know, other evidence of insulin poisoning. I mean, either there was a different murderer and we don't know about it on that ward, or, you know, something very strange was happening. But you have to, at some point, apply common sense.
Absolutely. I cannot imagine the heartbreak for the parents of any of these babies and what they're going through. Every time this is on the front page, and we've got people claiming this woman's innocence. But we do have a rule, better that, 10 guilty men walk free than one innocent person's behind bars. And if she is an innocent woman, she's this young woman, and she's been accused of these awful, the worst possible crimes, and is going to spend the rest of her life behind bars, does that need to be looked at, or do you think, or not?
Well, I actually do have some concerns about her guilt. I mean, there is some evidence, but we should be clear, it is mainly circumstantial evidence. Now, circumstantial evidence can be more than enough for a conviction, but I do think we need to keep an absolutely, totally open mind in this case.
Isn't that what the jury did in the case?
Well, we don't know. None of us sat in that room. It was a total secret as to their discussions, and we know that juries all the time get it wrong. I don't know why in this country we seem to have this belief that British juries are any better than, say, American juries. We know that juries they get it wrong. They got it wrong in that Andrew Malkinson case. 12 men, good and true, women and women, good and true, sat in that room and convicted a man for a crime he had absolutely nothing to do with. And we do need, I think, in this country to have a slightly more open attitude to the idea that courts get it wrong. And the Court of Appeal needs to be open
I'm
to
very
that.
happy if this case is going to stay. It involves so many babies that if we need to have something else open and we need to have more investigation, let's do that, because it's in everyone's interest on all counts, isn't it? So appreciate you joining us, Helen Fields, former criminal barrister and author. Thank you so much for that. We will await the sentencing of Daniel Khalife. That is still ongoing. These things often take quite some time. The judge talking through the case in great detail in Woolwich Crown Court right now. This is Talk. We are the home of common sense. Up next, we are going to be talking about the wokery. Where is it afflicting next? Oh, Network Rail. Of course it is. Apparently, we don't like being called passengers anymore. Who knew? This is Talk. We are the home of common sense.
all the people that you would have a secret meeting with during COVID. It wouldn't be a doctor. No. It wouldn't be anybody from some kind of, foreign organisation from around the world who you had to see. It would be a voice coach. Yeah, that's a really, really important thing. And on Christmas Eve, I mean, does this man not have any kind of, love at all? I thought he would like to spend time with his family. On Christmas Eve, I will spend time with a voice coach who will teach me how to speak properly. OK, Keir, I'll see you later on at home then.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Very, very good afternoon to you. This is Talk, the home of common sense. I'm Julia Hartley-Brewer. Sam Armstrong was with me. Sam, do you mind being called a passenger on a train when you get an announcement on a train when the train's late?
Do you know what? I'd take being called a passenger on a train because it would mean I'd actually got on a train. The last 2 weekends, I've had rail replacement bus services derailing absolutely
You'd just
all
be
of my
excited to be on the train and moving. You've got to have the train's got to be moving as well. Apparently, people are very upset about the word passengers. Network Rail has told staff to stop using the word passengers. They say it is basically it's more neutral term to say you instead of passenger. I don't understand because apparently it avoids assumptions about gender. I would have thought passenger doesn't involve gender at all. But they said basically it's to reduce customer frustration at train delays and cancellations because it's less formal. Words including purchase, obtain and rest assured have all been axed from the official lexicon. Instead of passenger, they're going to say you. And instead of saying things like, if you could give up your seat for a pregnant woman, you have to say pregnant person. Mother and father should be replaced with parent. It's all in a 134-page document that is rather incongruously titled, we discover, Speaking Passenger. Let's talk about this with Amy Gallagher. She's a commentator at the New Culture Forum. And Amy, I'm assuming you stopped guffawing by now, but this is, another bit of woke insanity, right?
Well, it's a complete contradiction because on the one hand, they're saying they want to use more ordinary language, but apparently we can't cope with long words like passenger. They want to dumb down and make it more simplistic. But at the same time, they want to impose gender-neutral language like pregnant person. Well, that's actually extremely elitist. Gender ideology comes out of universities. Ordinary people use words like man, woman, pregnant.
No, but also
mother.
All pregnant people are pregnant women. So why not just say pregnant women? There are no pregnant men.
Exactly. I mean, this is, and it's very exclusive actually, because those of us who are very concerned about the encroachment of gender identity and ideology onto our public services are really going to hate this. So the idea that this is inclusive, it's not actually, excludes lots of people who are furious about this stuff.
But also, if people are going to be bothered by being called a passenger, the main thing they're most bothered by is that this is when they're frustrated by delays, is the fact that the train isn't moving and isn't arriving on time. This all. We don't really care, unless we're called rude words or rudely dismissed. I would think a lot of it is in the tone of the voice by a conductor or an announcer. Is we just want the train to leave on time and arrive on time, and us to have a seat and not have to get remortgage our homes to be able to afford the ticket. They just get it so wrong, don't they?
I know, it's amazing of all the things to focus on. I mean, increasingly people are feeling like there's been a lowering of standards across public transport. People are increasingly using loudspeaker music, eating on the train, and of course we all have to travel in fear that we could be stabbed or sexually assaulted. And yet the thing that they are focusing on is language, and it's not language that anybody cares about anyway. I mean, it's absolutely absurd.
I know, exactly. And the funny thing is, actually, you can stop passengers from being frustrated by just trying to communicate as much as possible and also showing your frustration. If you're on a train or if you're on a plane and you can feel like the announcement is like, look, guys, we're trying to get information. We are doing our very best. We're trying to help you. I mean, I remember my family was on a train that was massively delayed yesterday. It was just non-stop problems. And when they finally arrived into London, the announcement was, Well, we're finally here at long last. And you know, and there's a feeling of camaraderie, at least, that we're all in it together, because, you know, the staff are just as late. But again, they always get it wrong. Councils, as we know, always get it wrong as well. The Sun reporting today, a woke council, North Devon Council, wants staff to avoid words like, this is weird, confident, driven and honest in job adverts. They're classing the terms as gender-coded, and they've got examples of 52 masculine coded words and 50 feminine coded words. So feminine words are kind, loyal and polite, but male words are confident, driven and honest. I mean, by the way, how sexist is that?
Yeah, I mean, this just shows that gender ideology isn't just censorious about language, but it's actually sexist and very regressive. Most of us, if we look at a job advert and it says they're looking for a confident person, a leader, we don't think, oh, that's a man. Most of us know that men and women can be confident and can be leaders. Equally, when a job advert looks for someone who's kind and polite, most of us don't think, oh, that's a woman. Yeah. Most of us think a man can be kind and polite.
Isn't it
this
bizarre?
reveals how these people think, not how ordinary people.
But this always comes down to every aspect of the sort of diversity, inclusion, and all of that stuff is in all of these things, and even like the whole trans ideology is all based on this sort of weird sort of 1950s idea of men and women in certain outfits. If you put lipstick on and a dress and then by definition you're feminine, if you behave in this way you're feminine. Most of us are kind of moved on from that stuff.
It's like they're having an argument with themselves. They see the world in this way and then they want to push against it, but they don't realise that most of us have moved on. Most people don't think in this way.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's an internal argument they're having with themselves.
Yeah, well, I wish they just could do it a bit more quietly and not be on the public pay packet when they did it. Amy Gallagher, commentator at the New Culture Forum, always talking sense. Thank you very much indeed. So, Sam, are you honest or are you caring? That's how I know whether you're a man or a woman, for goodness sake.
I just want to get where I want to go on time. I just want to go about
council
my life
providing. Hey, the council. Hey, pick up the bins. Collect the bins, that's all we want, collect the bins.
Doing your job isn't nearly as fun as imposing your own beliefs on
language
millions of parts of the society.
Absolutely.